Good evening, and welcome back to Pynchon Pals, a podcast about finally reading Thomas Pynchon. My name is Patrick Fiorilli, and I'm joined as always by Andrew Tillett.
Patrick. Hi, Duri. Hi, listener.
And Duri Long.
Greetings.
On tonight's episode, we are discussing chapters 10 and 11
Yes.
Yeah,
of Thomas Pynchon's V, a book we are all reading for the first time. Andrew, did you have you had an intro here?
Yeah. Get in, loser. We're podcasting. So our idea is basically as sort of a nightcap to V. I want to have a Q&A episode. And that involves a little give and take with the audience, mostly where we give content, but we take your questions. So we need you to send some questions in. Favorite character, least favorite character, character you'd want to go on a double date with, maybe some general for entertainment only life advice you might need. Basically anything you want us to talk about in relation to V, or maybe not in relation to V if it's a really good question. Send it to us. It can be serious and literary. It can be light and fun. Your questions, your queries, your thoughts, hypotheses, recipe ideas, send them in, and we're going to have an episode after the final V wrap-up episode dedicated to questions about V.
Yeah, so please send those in pynchonpals@gmail.com is the email address to get in touch.
And thanks to those of you who have already sent us questions.
Do we want to grab a question right now, just off the top of the episode to whet people's palates?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, you too can be like Dan from the UK, who writes, "Hi Pynchon Pals, hello from the UK. I'm very much enjoying reading V with you. I've combined all my future New Year's resolutions into one behemoth resolution, which is to read the entire Pynchon oeuvre." You've come to the right podcast, Dan. I've only read The Crying of Lot 49 so far, so I am very pleased that your podcast came along when it did. It definitely helped me get through Chapter 3. Doing this podcast also helped us get through Chapter 3, I will tell you. A question about V. Do you think there will be a single entity identified as the titular V at the end of the book? If there isn't, will that affect your opinion of the story? See you later, alligator. You started a thing. Dan.
When you're trying to read all of Pynchon in 2026?
I'll say this. We are not reading all of Pynchon in 2026, I don't think, based on our current schedule.
Good luck, Dan. I think we talked about this actually briefly a little bit on another episode. There was a real point where I didn't think V was going to be a single thing, and I guess we'll get into it more in this episode, but now I'm coming back around on V potentially being a single thing. And I do think it will impact how I see the book. I'm not sure if that's necessarily a positive or a negative. Trying to think through what my thoughts would be. I guess it's kind of hard to tell, to project how I will feel at the end of this book. Yeah, I think I've talked to Patrick in the past, totally unrelated to this pod, about sort of ideas of like granular evil in media and like overarching evil in media. And I think it's similar here, where like if there's a specific character of V, that can be really different than a grand idea of V. And generally I'm cool as long as it's one thing or the other. And if you try to stitch the two together is where things start to annoy me. So I'm excited to see what our good friend Thomas does here.
Excited to see whether Thomas Pynchon ends up annoying you.
Yeah. The jury's out.
I was definitely on team. We're not going to know a single answer to V. Like, V is multifaceted, multiplicitous.
V is love, V is life.
I similarly have been, as we've read some recent chapters, wondering if we're going to get a more definitive solution. But I think I would kind of prefer... I was coming around to like the idea of there not being a single answer for what V is. And it being... more something that the different characters maybe encounter from different perspectives. So there's a lot of different instantiations of V. I'm leaning towards liking there is no one single answer for V solution better, but we'll see where things go. I haven't been disappointed in Thomas Pynchon yet, so I trust that he's going to bring us to a good conclusion with this book.
He's going to bring it home. Yeah, I mean, I definitely keep reading this book, and basically every time there's a stencil chapter, I'm like, all right, here it is. This is surely V. And then it's sort of like that hypothesis is kind of quizzically displaced each and every time it comes up, including, as we will get into in this chapter, or one of the chapters that we're talking about today. I realized recently, I texted this in our group chat, that several commentators have drawn comparisons to another book that I haven't read by an author whose books I've read a lot of, but not this one, Vladimir Nabokov's The Real Life of Sebastian Knight, which was Nabokov's first novel in English. And as we learned from like the little bit of biographical info we have about Pynchon, it is entirely possible that he took Nabokov's class over at Cornell when he was there in the English department. But this novel is about, it's kind of like a literary biographical detective story about this author that is being written about by, I believe, his half-brother or stepbrother or something. The author's name is Sebastian Knight, and the narrator of the book uses what was Nabokov's, I remember this from some of Nabokov's earlier Russian novels, uses Nabokov's usual pen name back when he was writing in Russia, which was V. Sirin. So you have a narrator named V who is trying to track down the secret history of this other entity through literature. Our dog finds this conversation very interesting, as you might be able to hear on the mic. But yeah, so I don't think that necessarily directly relates to this question, but it is something that I have been thinking about digging into in my own free time, or perhaps something we might talk about on the podcast at some point in the future if we get to sort of supplementary readings related to Thomas Pynchon.
I appreciate that our very old dog is never like making a cute barking noise on the podcast, but it's just sort of like hacking up along in the background.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discourse on the internet recently from people talking about like dogs on streams and abusing dogs on streams. And we should just let it be known that our dog just has like a chronic cough.
Yes, and she's also very old. She's 19.
Yeah. Where were we?
We were at the start of chapter 10, following our very first Q&A.
Yeah, I also want to shout out Steven's question, which we didn't read on air, but which we already kind of answered by talking about one battle after another in the last, I guess not the last episode, but 2 episodes ago, for those of you listening. So thank you to Steven for sending in a question about one battle after another.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll revisit that even further when we read Vineland.
Shall we do a little summary of chapter 10?
Let's do it.
Take us away.
I'm going to admit, it is a fragmented chapter, so this is a bit of a fragmented summary of chapter 10, in which various sets of young people get together. McClintock Sphere, the free jazz band leader, has been thinking about switches, from flip to flop, cool to hot, and back. He frequents a rooming house/brothel run by Matilda, where he always calls on a girl named Ruby. Slab is painting nothing but cheese danishes and fighting with Esther, who's still sleeping with Schoenmaker, who wants to adjust her every detail. Rooney is distraught by Mafia's affairs with half of the crew. Profane is working at Anthro Research, having imaginary conversations with advanced weapons testing dummies Shroud and Shock. Stencil can't stop comparing his compatriots to the decadent partiers at Foppel's mansion. It's getting hot in New York, and the scene was sick even before the dog Charisma and Foo found on the street started puking in the kitchen. Everyone's yo-yoing now. Paula gives Stencil her father's confessions.
That was a good summary.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I think you nailed it.
Before me and Duri started talking, or before we started recording, me and Duri were talking, and we're saying how much stuff happened in this chapter, and I was making a comment that I'm not sure that all of it is the most relevant to the story as a whole, but I do love every minute of it. It's just great entertainment.
I do feel like this chapter kind of gives us our best portrait so far of the whole sick crew as a crew. Like this chapter and I will admit to having read ahead a little bit because of a tight recording schedule. One of the chapters we'll be talking about in the next episode, like, really gives us a sense. We've seen like fragments of the crew kind of together, and we've seen a handful of them here and there. But in these chapters, we get a real sense of the cabal that exists between all of these different entities. As the camera, again, kind of cinematically cuts between these little scenes and vignettes.
Yeah, I feel like we get a sense of the crew is like, they're not always all together. In fact, they're rarely all together, but they're like sort of connected, even when they're in different spaces. The crew is larger than I realized the whole sit crew was.
Yeah, the crew, I mean, yeah, they're very sort of an amorphous group that's sort of always adding someone, and maybe someone sort of on the outs at any given type. But yeah, I mean, I think this is like the best kind of friendship, or the best kind of like friend group, right? Where you can just sort of, whoever happens to be in the neighborhood
Andrew
at the
says
time
the whole
hangs
sick
out.
crew is the best kind of friends.
They seem fun. You just sort of drop in, whoever happens to be around. You guys can get coffee. You can sit in the park. You can talk about how your wife is cheating on you with Rachel in every page. And this is what friends are for, guys. Like, this is what friends are for.
It's true. So we begin by returning to McClintock's sphere, who we have not sort of directly followed until now.
We've only listened to his music.
We've only listened to his music, and we are still listening to his music as we encounter him here. But he is, again, many commentators have compared the way Pynchon describes McClintock as being reminiscent of Ornette Coleman, this sort of like pioneer of the free jazz movement, free jazz genre, wherein the improvisation is taken to an extreme. You are riffing on each other's musical contributions without necessarily relegating your playing to scales or modes, but just kind of following feeling and inspiration as you play.
I thought it was interesting coming off of chapter 9, in which we really saw the depth of sort of egregious racism and genocide. We come off of chapter 9. We start off chapter 10. It's nearly, like 40, 50 years later. And immediately we see...
Yeah, 2 world wars have happened.
Yeah, 2 world wars have happened. Like, a lot of time has passed. And immediately we see, like, racism bubble up to the surface as McClintock's sphere is interacting with people in the V note.
Yeah, these, like, Ivy League types who are ostensibly patronizing him, but also in a big way patronizing him.
Yeah,
as a black
he calls
performer.
it the Northern Liberal routine, and I just thought that is interesting, and a running theme that I'll be returning to as we talk about these 2 chapters is that idea of history is sort of like a sine wave that's going up and down. I feel like that was coming back to me all over the place in these 2 chapters, and I feel like this was the first one was like, we leave, this racism, genocide in the past, and it comes, right back around on the next page of the chapter 10.
Yeah, it's sort of from decadence to decadence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As we follow McClintock, he drives up to Harlem, to this house run by Matilda Winthrop, and encounters Ruby, who becomes his kind of interlocutor for this chapter. He's both sleeping with her and also meditating on his own anxieties and conflicts with the state of the world.
And seems kind of like in love with her a little bit.
He's so in love with her. I mean, he says not in this sort of 2-page stint with him, but I think in another one, he's like, you can't fall in love with a prostitute, but he's fallen in love real hard.
Yeah, which is the classic, this is a kind of trope of the down and out performer, seeking attachment and love by paying for it. It feels very sort of like seedy, hard-boiled film noir almost.
And then camera shift. We turn to our next young set of people. who are getting together, Slab and Esther.
I love Slab, dude. He's the best.
The cheese danishes.
The cheese.
Can we talk about the
danishes?
cheese danishes?
Let's talk
Oh
about
my
cheese
God.
Danish. Currently, we're looking at cheese Danish number 35, but why are they numbered?
So he's painted. I mean, I guess this is the 35th, and we get to like the 42nd, I think, by the end of this chapter. He is knocking out cheese danishes, and he's doing it under the sort of auspice that, who is it? It's he's doing it in the style of Monet, who only painted water lilies for an extended period. Slab believes himself to be following those footsteps by only painting cheese danishes.
In a variety of different artistic styles. He's got cubist, he's got surrealist cheese danishes.
He's got
I
his
think
own new art style, catatonic expressionism.
Catatonic expressionism.
Were you going to say something?
yes, I was just going to say it's a good item for the cookbook.
Cheese
yeah.
danishes?
Yeah.
Why
sort of-
has he chosen cheese danishes as his subject?
It's after his long yo-yo. At the very end of the chapter, it says that he holds the yo-yoing record. I guess should I just explain what the yo-yoing is now?
Go for
I
it.
sp- I
Yeah,
guess it
sure.
makes
Let's
sense.
explain yo-yoing.
So yo-yoing is a whole sick crew pastime where you get truly drunk. I think the first rule is you have to be truly drunk. None of
You
this
can't be
like
sober.
none of this like I had a beer, I'm tipsy. You have to be hammered. And then you get on a specifically north-south bound metro subway.
I believe they
in
call
New
it.
York.
I believe they call it the subway in New York, not the
Yeah.
metro.
Well,
You're really locating yourself with that
I
one.
guess I'll quit the podcast.
Not the
Um,
L either.
And it's not the tube. Stencil calls it the tube. But you have to go north-south, and you have to. The only other rule is you have to wake up at least once on every leg, so that you can prove that you performed it and weren't just somewhere else or just lost track of time. And the goal is to go as long as possible. And the whole sick crew record is held by Slab, who over, I guess, a long weekend did 69 north-south transits of New York City. And when he finally stumbled off the train, found a bakery and ate a dozen cheese danishes in one sitting.
And got sick and got arrested.
That just goes without saying.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that, or Pynchon writes that this is kind of inspired by Profane joining back up with the group a little bit, and I guess explaining his own yo-yoing, or people sort of hearing about this guy, Benny Profane, who yo-yos up and down the East Coast. And it returns us to that kind of yo-yo fad that we learned about as being the inspiration for Yo-Yo Dine back in the day, when everyone was buying yo-yos and Chiclets' toy company was producing a lot of them. Now we get a different kind of fad related to yo-yoing, except this time the whole sick crew was doing it.
Yeah. I liked Slab's line where he's explaining to Esther why he paints the cheese danishes, and he says, "I like cheese danishes. They have kept me alive now for longer than I can remember. Why not?"
At some point, Slab is described as one of the few members of the whole sick crew who actually kind of produces anything. And he is sort of one of the few people we get who is actually making work. Doesn't necessarily seem like he is selling a whole lot of them per se, or getting them placed in galleries, but he has an artistic practice. You know, something is working here for Slab.
Well, and at some point, I forget exactly where it is, but they mention that, like, Slab is kind of talented. He just, like, chooses to only paint cheese danishes, which kind of reduces his perhaps artistic import. But, like, he's a good painter.
Andy Warhol only painted cans for a while, guys. I think Slab is going to
that right?
have his day. And, you know, if Slab had been a real character, we would see prints of cheese danishes on freshman dorms throughout the nation. Should we describe what cheese danish number 35 is exactly? Because it's not just a cheese danish like
Ain't
on
your
a
average
plate.
everyday cheese Danish.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just gonna read slightly, I guess. The subject of Cheese Danish number 35 occupied only a small area to the lower left corner, where it was pictured impaled on one of the metal steps of a telephone pole. The landscape was an empty street, drastically foreshortened. The only living things in it, a tree in the middle distance on which perched an ornate bird, busily textured with a great many swirls, flourishes, and bright colored patches. And then later, they describe a gargoyle with sharp fangs near the top of the picture. The point of the largest fang lay on an imaginary line projected parallel to the axis of the tree and drawn through the head of the bird, which is not really a painting of a Cheese Danish, as it is so much, I think, a painting partially of Profane's Dream Street. Like, you get the same V lights, but also the beautiful bird is, I think, reminds me of Visu. You know?
I also was kind of reminded of Visu. Did you guys look up at the very end of the chapter? There's a brief reference to a particular painting.
De
Chirico's Street. Did you guys look up that painting?
I did, indeed.
I feel like it's coming up, like the visuals from that painting are coming up all throughout this chapter and the next. And I feel like it's a visual that looks a lot like Profane's Street. And it also looks a little bit like this sort of empty street. In the De Chirico painting, there's sort of these shadows of like this little girl and then this larger kind of intimidating shadow, which could be a human, could be a statue, that are sort of projected on the ground of this empty street. Anyways, I think we'll come back to that, but I feel like the visual that Slav has painted here does not feel drastically different from De Chirico's Street.
Yeah, and also in the sort of surrealist kind of Mediterranean architectural stylings of a lot of De Chirico's work reminded me of Pynchon's descriptions of Malta that we get in the next chapter in a big way as well, with sort of like the sun-bleached rocks and...
Totally, and there's a lot of shadow imagery that's showing up in this chapter and the next that I think, again, calls back to this street visual.
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems that this mystery and melancholy of a street painting by De Chirico is privately held and not currently on exhibit anywhere. But Duri, you and I just saw a work by De Chirico at the Art Institute of Chicago.
Which one was by De Chirico?
Let me see if I can find it.
We had a great trip to the Art Institute, and I feel like everywhere we looked, I was seeing things that reminded me of Thomas Pynchon. I feel like I could make my own little curated exhibit of Pynchon-esque paintings.
I believe over one afternoon I received several texts from you that said stencil coded and Mildred coded with
oh, yeah, the
photos
Mildred
of
painting.
paintings.
Was like this guy, he was like holding a fossil while like sort of a bacchanal was going on behind him. Very Mildred vibes.
Yeah, bonus content, we'll just do sort of like a guided Pynchon-esque tour of various art museums. This is the
one with the artichoke.
The one with the artichoke. The Philosopher's Conquest, it is called, by De Chirico.
Also a street, and it also has a shadow in it.
And also it has a cannon with two cannonballs that sort of resemble a penis.
But the cannonballs are artichokes, yeah?
Well, yes, but also on the left side of the painting, there's two cannonballs.
Yes, I see that. But like, interesting, like we have this painting of a street, and there's sort of like a random food object in the foreground.
Oh my goodness. Andrew,
Patrick,
what have you just returned with?
I was just, sorry, I just jumped away to my bookshelf. I didn't realize that this is this painting. Patrick, do you know what book this is?
I do indeed. That's the Modiano. What is this one?
This is Patrick Modiano's Honeymoon, which uses this painting that we're just now talking about as its cover. And this is important for the listener to know about me and Patrick's lore. And Duri, I don't know if you know this story.
I don't think I do.
In college, Patrick once wrote a short story.
Unpublished anywhere,
Unpublished short story. I guess it was like a class or something. Anyway, he explained it to me, and then I read it, and we had to break it to him that Patrick Modiano had already written the exact same short story and won the Nobel Prize for it. So, at least in some copies of Honeymoon, this painting is the cover.
And I'm not ashamed to admit when I'm bested by Nobel Prize winning author Patrick Modiano.
Shares a given name.
I feel this is as good a point as any to bring up one of my main beefs with this book, which is that the cover art is horrible. And I feel like there are so many ripe opportunities for good, like amazing cover art for V, one of which is perhaps this painting by Chirico would be great cover art. Instead, we have like this heinous, like,
yeah, which edition are you talking about? Put them on blast and say the graphic designer's name as well.
Sorry. I'm sure they're great. It's not doing much for me. The green V and the circle with the like photo of cobblestones. It's no Chirico.
Well, I would like to return to this conversation as we get to the end of our discussion here today, because on my cover, which is the Harper Perennial version.
I like your cover better.
I'll link to these in the show notes as well. But it features this figure dressed in priest's robes, wearing sort of women's high-heeled shoes with long hair blowing in the wind, and the figure is pulling up their kind of priestly skirt. I don't know exactly what the word is here. And the whole time I've been reading this book, I was like, surely that must be V, but where am I supposed to get this image? Where does it come from? And boy, do we learn where that image might come from as we get to chapter 11.
Indeed we do, Patrick, and I think we even learn the word for the priestly skirt.
Oh yeah, I had to Google. Yes, this word starts showing up constantly.
Soutane?
Soutane, yeah. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
All right, shall we return to, before we get to the excitement of chapter 11, shall we return to Esther and Slab? They're fighting. Esther and Slab are fighting.
I had one.
They used to sleep together, but not anymore. That's important.
There was one little tidbit from this interaction with Slab and Esther that I wanted to read before we move on to our next young couple.
Mm-hmm.
It was as Slab was sort of explaining his painting that he was doing. She's Danish number 35. He calls it the partridge in the pear tree and calls back to the Christmas song. And he says that the beauty is that it works like a machine, yet is inanimate. The partridge eats pears off the tree, and his droppings in turn nourish the tree, which grows higher and higher, every day lifting the partridge up, and at the same time assuring him of a continuous supply of food. It's perpetual motion, except for one thing, and then there's the gargoyle, and someday the bird will be impaled on the gargoyle's teeth, just like the Portuguese Danish is already on the phone pole. And I thought this was a really interesting description, given all of our discussion of animacy and inanimacy. And
perpetual motion.
And like systems in motion, like this idea of like history and like, I don't know, I felt like I was reminded of this idea of the world kind of working like a machine. Like we have cycles that happen and things that feed into each other. And Esther asks, why can't the pigeon, was it a pigeon? Yeah, partridge, sorry. Why can't the partridge fly away? And Slab says he is too stupid. He used to know how to fly once, but he's forgotten. And so it's like we're stuck in these kind of like machine-like cycles.
Feedback loops,
yeah. And we've forgotten how to get out of them.
Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of in the air in this moment in the 50s, especially, I think, if you are Thomas Pynchon and working as a technical writer at Boeing. The idea of cybernetics as an explanation for systems broadly, or like systems thinking generally, both in computing and in the natural environment and in mathematics and in all sorts of sociological interactions. The idea that, these loops define how systems change and develop over time. And if you can learn to adjust or control those loops, then you can do a lot to change the output of a system and bend it in a certain direction, which kind of feels like how history is discussed in this book.
I think we're probably going to talk a little bit more about finite state machines in a few sections.
few sections.
For sure. Maybe even the next section.
Maybe even the next section.
Let's see. Rooney and Rachel are drinking, and they're sad. Just like sort of a brief section here describing that Rooney and Rachel are both sad.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Rachel keeps calling Paula a strange girl. We still don't know why.
Rooney is, I guess, the intimation here is that he is still sort of trying to sleep with either Rachel or Paula.
Mostly Paula.
Mostly Paula. Yeah. But he's getting the idea. I mean,
at one point, he does consider sleeping with Rachel. Am I wrong?
Just
no, yeah. In the
he
last,
can't find Paula.
in the last section, he's like, I'm going to try. Well, he says he's going to try to get Rachel to pimp Paula out. And if that doesn't work, maybe Rachel would be an alternative. And I guess he's basically still staying true to that original plan and has made no forward progression on either part.
And then we cut to Profane.
Profane's getting up to some
wild
stuff.
First, he's reading
got a job.
book.
He's got a job. Congratulations, Benny.
And he is reading a book with the greatest title. I wish this book actually existed. It is a avant-garde Western called The Existentialist Sheriff.
Every book in this chapter that is referenced is a Western of some type.
Yeah, everyone's reading Westerns.
I was thinking about how Pynchon only, like, I guess all of Pynchon's books are these sort of grand capital L literature novels, or they're noir. No Westerns. And I was like, why is he keeps talking about Westerns, but he's not writing any Westerns. And I would like a Pynchon Western.
There's got to be some sort of Western elements in Mason and Dixon.
Maybe.
We'll see.
Maybe.
We'll see. We'll see when we get there. I will say, here's something I know sort of coincidentally because I was looking at it in a bookstore recently. But the novel Warlock by Oakley Hall is a sort of like a literary, not quite avant-garde, but definitely literary Western novel set in Tombstone, Arizona. And there is a blurb on the back of the book that is written by Thomas Pynchon in one of his few sort of, like, I'm talking about another book writings. He and his buddies were extremely into this book in college at Cornell. And he writes about how they would go around talking in this vaulted, like, 1880s sort of Western dialect around their campus. Which reminds me a little bit, Duri and I have been watching a lot of Deadwood, which is how I found this novel out, because I saw comparisons to it in relation to people talking about Deadwood. But this feels like the kind of thing, this feels like what Pynchon is referencing here with The Existentialist Sheriff, is this novel Warlock by Oakley Hall that he is historically a really big fan of.
Interesting.
Put it on the to-read list. Can we also talk about how Existentialist Sheriff was recommended by Pig Bodine?
Yeah, the whole set crew reads more than I realized.
Yeah, I read this and I was like, this either means that Existentialist Sheriff is also smut, and we're not hearing about that, or Pig is also like deeper and like a literary guy, and he's like, look, I dabble in smut, I run the smut library, but also if you need like a real rec, I can get you a real rec that you can read out in public.
Well, he's also been hanging around the Rusty Spoon, so it's also entirely possible that he likes reading sort of like smutty genre fiction, and someone over there is like, you seem to like existentialism, maybe you'd like this book, The Existentialist Sheriff.
Do you think he's just parroting a suggestion from one of the intellectuals that he's hanging out with at the Rusty Spoon?
In as much as the intellectuals at the Rusty Spoon, as we keep hearing about, only parrot proper nouns that they have read from other people.
Yeah,
yes.
And I think we'll get into this more later, but I feel like both Profane and Pig Bodine are sort of play acting at this, like, sort of intellectual, like, whole sit crew member-ness. They're like, they come from sort of a very different background than some of the other members of the whole sit crew, but they seem to enjoy sort of putting on the mask of being a member of the whole sit crew.
Or
at
least Pig does.
At least Pig
seems to be good
at
at
this
it.
point, and like passing around proper nouns. Yeah.
Wow. So at Anthro Research Associates. Profane's job is to be the night watchman. He has to do 3 sort of walk-arounds of the facility every night. And also, if there happens to be any kind of 24-hour experiment going on, he checks in on the values and makes sure that everything is sort of staying in limits and calls a technician if he needs to. And there's sort of 2 main experiments that they run at AA. Patrick,
which, by the way, is a subsidiary of Yoyodyne.
True. It's a subsidiary of Yoyodyne that, what does it say it does its research on? A subsidiary of Yoyodyne, it did research for the government on the effects of high altitude and spaceflight, for the National Safety Council on automobile accidents, and for civil defense oil radiation absorption. Just fun tech experiments.
Uh-huh. And again, kind of that crossover between everyday technology and the sort of like military industrial complex. We have 2 experiments. One is SHROUD, which stands for Synthetic Human Radiation Output Determined. And we also have SHOCK, which stands for Synthetic Human Object Casualty Kinematics. And both of these are, would you guess, inanimate humans. So they're like synthetic humans, mannequins, if you will, that they're using for experiments, in SHOCK's case, to test sort of like car crashes. So it's like a crash dummy, sort of, except it's like a really high-tech crash dummy with a lot of sort of like realistic features, such as like actual sort of like working lungs
and functioning genitalia.
Yes.
Hot swappable functioning genitalia.
And then we have SHROUD, which was a little harder to grasp.
Yeah, so SHROUD is an actual human skeleton who is 5'9", which they note is the 50th percentile of Air Force standards. And he is covered in a plastic, which is transparent to X-ray, gamma rays, neutrons, anything, radiation related. And he also has sort of this plastic organs, which can be filled with liquid to absorb radiation. And he's used as a dosimeter, basically. He's like pockmarked with dosimeters, and they can find out how much radiation he's absorbing.
Can you tell us what a dosimeter is, Andrew?
It's just a device that measures your like effective dose of radiation. So if you like worked in a nuclear lab, you'd have one like pinned to your belt or to your collar or something, and it just tells you how much radiation you've absorbed through the environment. And they have, this type of plastic and stuff definitely exists that they use to test, these plastics that are skin-like, and it can give you a good idea of how much radiation that you'd actually take and what kind of damage it would do.
Yeah, the companion to V mentions that someone else mentions that that this seems to be based off of a profile in the New York Times from, 1959 on the work of Alderson Research Laboratories, which had 2 figures called REMAB, or radiation equivalent man absorption, or radiation equivalent man, absorption, and REMCAL, radiation equivalent man calibration, and that these industrialized inanimate figures that are used in radiation testing seem to be more or less drawn from life, although not quite as fantastically rendered as the weird plastic skeleton creature here, or the one with sort of interchangeable body parts.
NASA today has satellites on orbit that have these types of plastics, and they're meant to get, a good idea of what an astronaut might experience outside of Earth's atmosphere, like for this exact reason.
And we see here, sort of returning to some of our themes from the stencil chapters, that the narrator writes that in the 18th century, it was often convenient to regard man as a clockwork automaton. In the 19th century, with Newtonian physics pretty well assimilated and a lot of work on thermodynamics going on, man was looked on more as a heat engine, about 40% efficient. Now in the 20th century, with nuclear and subatomic physics a going thing, man had become something which absorbs X-rays, gamma rays, and neutrons. And so we have this idea that in each sort of era of modernity, there's a metaphor, an inanimate metaphor of what is a human being, whether that is something that's made of clockwork, something that is a heat engine, something that absorbs radiation. And I think you can pretty easily extend that into the contemporary era, or maybe the era just after when this book was written, as we get into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which is that, well, a human being is basically a kind of computer.
And we see our sinusoidal wave.
And we see our
again.
sinusoidal
Right
wave
back at
again.
There's also a callback, I think, to the stencil chapter when they talk about shock being used in these crash tests and how they are like simulating injuries to shock and talking about this issue, I guess, where because of how shock is engineered, you cannot mutilate its like chest and lungs at the same time that you mutilate its sex organs. In a car crash, you can only simulate one of those things at a time. And it was this really kind of like graphic description of like seemingly possibly unnecessary mutilation of this synthetic human. And I don't know, it called me back a little bit to chapter 9. And we've kind of come to this place where like we're simulating human mutilation in this laboratory. Anyways.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of sort of Nazi experiments, there's like a kind of simulation of human experimentation, which is, you know, certainly more ethical than experimenting on humans. But I do think there is a lot of repeated imagery here and there, especially since we know that, you know, Yoyodyne has Nazi engineers working at it. They're endeavoring to replicate humans as much as possible in order to run human experimentation.
Yeah, it felt weird.
Yes, when you think of like, I mean, shock you described as a crash test dummy. You know, you sort of, if you're thinking of it in an actual car crash, you want to know, did the chest cavity survive? Like that's actually important to like a person's survival, but you don't really need to rerun the experiment afterwards to see if the genitals survive. Like that's not really a thing. Unless you're
running a eugenics program.
Exactly. Like, yeah, like it's an unnecessary for like human survival to check that if the lung, like, you know, if your chest doesn't make it, you don't need to rerun the experiment to see if something else gets damaged too.
But Benny starts talking to his new friends, Shroud and Shock.
I think he finds a kinship in them because they are also inanimate, as he sees himself being inanimate.
He does describe Shock as the first non-human schlemiel that he's ever met on his first day. So,
yeah, and so he has various conversations with them.
Perhaps the most forceful line here in their conversation is when Benny asks Shroud, "What's it like?" And Shroud replies, and we should mention typographically, Shroud's responses aren't given in quotation marks; they're sort of given in the voice of the narrator almost, but Shroud replies, "Better than you have it." "What?" replies Benny. "Why, yourself. Me and Shock are what you and everybody will be someday." The skull seemed to be grinning at Profane. So there's this sense, Shroud's whole philosophy here seems to be that all of this research, all of this technological progress is pointing towards the dehumanization of humanity, that everybody becomes an inanimate test subject eventually, if history proceeds along the course that it is running.
Yeah.
It keeps getting darker after that, but not before we go back to the whole sick crew and a kind of fun house party.
Yeah, what happens at this house party? We've got
Mafia continuing to be racist and also horny.
Hig and Rooney get in a fist fight. Presumably over Mafia, but actually over Paola.
Yeah, there's, speaking of sort of like a Freudian transference, we have these two men who are actually both in love with Paola and trying to track her down, but who are ostensibly fighting over the wife that Pig might actually be sleeping with. It is kind of unclear.
I think everyone is sleeping with Mafia.
Seems like it.
Except for Benny
Except
Profane.
Benny.
Except Benny, who
Good guy,
rejects her.
Benny.
Yeah, he turns down Mafia, and he said, here he was arguing again, like with Fina in the bathtub. So, once again, Benny kind of talks himself out of a sexual encounter.
Although this time, he's the one who's like, maybe I should sleep with Mafia. And then Mafia's into it, and he gets scared. So it's a little bit different. He starts out as bad guy Benny, but then comes back around.
Mafia has an interesting description of womanhood.
Does she ever?
She says a woman wants to feel like a woman is all. She wants to be taken, penetrated, ravished. But more than that, she wants to enclose the man with spider webs woven of yo-yo string, a net or a trap. Profane could think of nothing but Rachel.
Yeah, the spider webs woven of yo-yo string seems to be Benny's gloss of what Mafia is talking about.
And it kind of seems to be like what he's afraid of continually with all of these women that he interacts with. Like, he's afraid of being entrapped.
All these women, man.
I mean, Fina. I don't understand why Benny is so popular with the ladies.
Riz? Why are any of the people in
plain and simple?
Why is anyone in the whole sick crew popular with the ladies?
That's a great question, Andrew.
The ladies start asking themselves that question eventually.
As they well should.
Yeah, he doesn't know how to explain that sometimes women remind him of inanimate objects, and even, like, young Rachel, even half an MG. And then meanwhile...
Charisma sings a lengthy song.
About?
P's and Q's?
Yes. From Ludwig Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. We're back!
Okay, Patrick, take it away.
We're all the way back. So you'll remember in the last episode, I talked for a long time about this, the world is everything that is the case. And I'm going to talk hopefully for a little less about it this time. But this whole song is comparing these sort of logical propositions that Wittgenstein tries to create in this first and very influential work of his, the Tractatus. This thesis 1.7 that's mentioned does not actually exist, but may, according to some commentators, relate to this first proposition that the world is everything that is the case, and the last proposition, which I think I also mentioned last time, is whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. So you have this relationship between there are things in the world, we attain a knowledge of those things through logical expression, and if we can get to the clearest identification of what a logical expression or proposition is, that's the P in all of this song, then we can, like, understand as much as we can about the world by understanding the logic that our expressions are governed by. But then there are also perhaps things that we can't speak about, and that eventually kind of leads Wittgenstein into a different direction with his work, which I was later learning was published. I looked up the timeline here. So the Tractatus, his first book, was published in 1921. V was published in 1963, and Philosophical Investigations, his second book, was published in 1953. So a little bit before the action of this book actually takes place, Wittgenstein would have recently died, and his second book would have been published posthumously.
Why do you think Charisma is singing about Wittgenstein?
That's a great question, Duri.
Charisma, who still has the blanket on, by the way. This blanket must be disgusting.
He showers with it. It gets clean.
It gets clean. It
has
wet.
burn holes in it for his eyes to look out of.
Yeah, because he's smoking a joint under it. Yeah, It's great. It seems to me that part of this is definitive of the whole sick crew kind of as a group of people, which is that they have nominally read some famous philosophy, but they are mostly using it as excuses to sleep with each other.
I think that's a good read.
Yeah.
By the end of this song, Mafia is also under the disgusting green blanket.
I can't believe you guys don't think this is a fun friend group.
I would hang out with them. I would go to these house parties.
They sound insufferable. Absolutely insufferable.
Yeah, and many people are insufferable. They're still fun hangs.
I don't know.
If you're also insufferable, then what's the problem? We can all be insufferable together.
Yeah, so, There are birds, there are bees, and to hell with all your P's and Q's.
I think I share Rachel's opinions of the whole sick crew, which we'll get to in a little bit, but she's sort of aloof from the group.
Yeah.
Maybe has had it up to here with the whole sick crew.
Indeed. Meanwhile, we get another one of these kind of historical flashes of a bunch of horrific deaths and disasters and accidents happening around the globe, which Pynchon's narrator says comes directly from like a yearly almanac.
And he says the world started to run more and more afoul of the inanimate. So he describes all of these disasters as the world running afoul of inanimate things like ferry boats or trains or trucks.
The last time we saw one of these sections was right at the end of chapter 8, because it is the sort of thing right at the beginning of that stencil part right at the end. And that was all like sort of grand historical events, right? Like we get the marrying of the Prince of Monaco to the actress. We get
tensions between Israel and Egypt.
And Israel-Egyptian war stuff going on. But this is all just like sort of low level, not low level. There's a lot of people die in this one paragraph, but like not necessarily historically meaningful events, but just like everyday disasters that can occur.
Yeah, like stuff that would probably show up in the New York Times for one day, but people would not necessarily remember a year later.
Yeah.
Like 4 petroleum tanks blew up near DeMoss, Texas on 29 July, killing 19. Did anyone look up, like, are these actual things that happened?
I did not look them up.
I didn't look them all up. Yeah, I just assumed.
Well, not all of them. I didn't expect that either of you would look up all of these.
Maybe J. Cary Grant did. Give me 1 second.
If he's worth his stripes, he is. Also, unrelated, I looked up what the dog star is. Sirius. I guess I probably should have known that. I didn't realize the dog days of summer, that expression comes from this like time period at the end of the summer when this Sirius, the star, is actually like in the sky near the sun.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's not just an expression.
Yeah, this is kind of our first introduction to the fact that it's like August and it's getting hot and people are getting restless and people are getting angry and the city of Nueva York is kind of stirred up.
Yeah, you get a lot.
We talk about more
in the McClintock sections that come a little bit later of him describing sort of the general tension in the city being ratcheted up as people sort of come out of their winter hibernations.
Yep. Duri and I just, for spooky season, I guess it's kind of a ways away from that by the time you're listening to this, but we watched Zodiac, and there's a scene in Zodiac that I think is longer in the director's cut that we watched where there's like a bunch of sort of news anchor headline voices and then just a bunch of pop songs that flash on a totally black screen for like a minute and a half. And it basically is the auditory version of one of these sections. And it was the first thing I thought about when we were watching that scene.
We both looked at each other and we're like,
it's like Pynchon. Thomas Pynchon. Which is sort of like 90% of our conversations at this point.
What did the companion to V tell you about these events, Patrick?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Okay.
Another thing in this section is reference, but not the veracity of these events.
Okay. Well, I assumed that they were real events.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Correct us if we're wrong.
Very reasonable things too, unfortunately, could occur.
Yep.
So then we
back to McClintock.
Pan back to McClintock's sphere.
He is
who's back with Ruby.
Yeah, he's laying in bed reading fake books, which I had to Google what that was.
Same.
You want to tell us what a fake book is?
Yeah, it seems to be a sort of unofficial music jazz book that's sort of put together by people as like individuals, not published as sort of an official copy of anything.
Yeah, and specifically it has like basically it contains the parts of the songs that people know and would recognize, that you can like get the melody and the major chord changes, but then you can improvise off of that pretty easily. And he specifically says that they're really depressing to read, not for the music, but because of the lyrics, presumably because most of the jazz standards are about heartbreak and sadness and longing and wistfulness.
And we find out that Ruby is thinking about her father. McClintock thinks that she wants to go home and see her dad, but he doesn't know where her dad lives, and she seems reluctant to make the trip. It's all a little ambiguous.
Which puts him in a mood to think about electricity.
I'm so excited to talk about the flip-flops.
Get into it. I could tell.
Yeah. So he talks about this idea of flip-flops and was inspired by this idea, like this type of switch that exists in electricity. And then he kind of took inspiration in his music from it. And it took me back to my digital logic class that I took in my senior year of college, where we did a lot of stuff with, I was a computer science major, and it's been a minute since I've taken this class, but we did a lot of like constructing of logic gates. And anyways, long story short, the flip-flop switch is what's used to make a bit in a computer that can flip between a state of either 0 or 1. And it's used, we brought up sort of this idea of finite state machines earlier, which are, could be described as like these sort of like cyclical, sets of states that a computer goes through. And the flip-flops are used in that, to sort of determine the state of a particular logic gate at a particular moment in time. And it's determined both on its like previous state as well as, what action is taken at that moment. And he kind of calls back to computers as well. He says, this flip-flop is one of the basic units of a cell in a big electronic brain, referring back to the computer. I also refreshed my mind on what a flip-flop switch looks like. And it kind of looks like two V's, if you will, or an X.
Yeah, an X.
Two V's, an X, And also reminded me of our good friend Bongo Shaftesbury from way back in, was that chapter 3?
Yeah.
Who had the sort of switch in his arm. And McClintock talks about this feeling as they're going into summer and like the heat is ratcheting up and energy is ratcheting up. The idea that like people are kind of on the verge of flipping in some sense. And that really reminded me of Bongo Shaftesbury as like a person who you flip a switch and they could switch to an entirely different sort of mental state.
McClintock talks about sort of society as a whole at one point, saying that after the end of the war, I don't remember if I think they flopped, he says, at the end of the war, and that sort of Harlem, it says here in Harlem, they flopped. Everything got cool. No love, no hate, no worries, no excitement. But then he says, every once in a while, though, somebody flips back. And a couple of, 2 pages before that, we get this description of McClintock at the V note and him seeing Winsome, and Winsome being truly like bad off. It says he'd seen that look before, a bass player he'd known in Fort Worth who never changed expression, who was always telling you, I have this problem with narcotics, who'd flipped one night and they took him away to the hospital at Lexington or someplace. McClintock would never know, but Rooney had the same look, too cool, too unemotional when he said, I have a problem with women.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that this is foreshadowing that Winsome is about to go off the rails in a major way.
Yeah, he thinks Rooney's about to flip.
Yeah, there's several things going on here as well that I'm now really putting the pieces together that this relates directly, I think, to that Wittgenstein song, in that one of the big ideas of the Tractatus is that if the world is everything that is the case and you can logically express what is the case, then you can have an understanding about the world, and therefore you can solve philosophy, basically, if you understand the essence of what a logical proposition is. And sort of computer science and information science really comes in swinging in the 50s and 60s with this idea that if you add enough of these on or off bits together, you collect, 8 of them into a byte. You start adding those bytes together. Eventually, you could basically get a complete picture of the mathematical, physical world by concatenating all of these either-or statements together, which is an extension of the kind of logical positivism that Wittgenstein is credited for initiating or popularizing back in the Tractatus. Meanwhile, you also have this play, because McClintock is a jazz musician, you have this play on like hot versus cool jazz, which comes up in the post-war period, that, you had all this hot bebop music that cools down after the war into the 50s and 60s. And so you get like Miles Davis or, some of these other or pioneers of cool jazz.
And McClintock even makes a song called Set Reset, which is a type of flip-flop switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lyrics include flip or flop, flip, once I was hip, flip, flop, now you're on top, set, reset, why are we beset with crazy and cool in the same molecule? And I also think, talking about this out loud, like hot and cool and a fella named McClintock, I wonder if McClintock is also kind of a reference to Marshall McLuhan, the sort of eminent media theorist who postulated that media can be divided into hot versus cold media depending on the amount of information that they send to you in a single signal. So something like film is a very hot medium because it has a lot of visual detail, sonic detail. You are seeing everything very clearly. You as the audience don't have to do a lot of work. Whereas something like television back in the 50s and 60s, McLuhan said, was a cool medium because you had to do a lot of cognitive work to fill in the gaps because the signal was kind of blurry, the sound was bad, you were actively working to participate in the medium, and therefore it was kind of cool. And I know a lot of McLuhan's work was like published in the mid 60s, so it maybe actually post-dates this book, but it looks like he was doing some of this work in part funded by the Ford Foundation, who comes up later in the 50s and early 60s. So I'm not 100% confident that McClintock Sphere and Marshall McLuhan are analogous to each other in some way, but they are both talking about hot and cold things and information science.
Yeah, and I think this idea of flipping, like, it's interesting, like, they talk about the flipping of the bits and, like, this, like, flipping and flopping in music, the flipping and flopping that can occur in, like, a single person as someone kind of flips, and also the idea of the world flipping. Just before the passage you read, Andrew, he says, that war, the world flipped, but come 45, and they flopped. And I feel like, again, that reminded me of our sinusoidal wave of the world kind of flipping to one state, flopping to another state, and this like repeating over time.
Yeah, so McClintock's thinking about flipping.
And then we cut to Schoenmaker and Esther.
My only note on this section is I just wrote, fuck Schoenmaker.
Yeah, honestly,
he
he's
so
the
bad.
absolute worst. And that's like saying something compared to the rest of the whole sick crew. Like
well,
that.
Schoenmaker's not in my whole sick crew. He's not part of it. I refuse to accept that, but he's terrible.
He's so bad. And I don't know why Esther keeps going back to him. God help her.
And they're arguing over Schoenmaker just wants to like a couple tiny little tweaks and just a few more operations. He thinks
30 minutes.
Esther would really be something.
He wants her pelvic bones to protrude more. He says, if I can bring out the beautiful girl inside you, the idea of Esther, as I have already done with your face. And then she gets upset, obviously, for obvious reasons. But why can't he just sort of love her as she is? And why does he want to like bring out, you know, this hidden idea of Esther?
Do you remember this the like pelvic bone internet trend thing that happened recently?
I don't only not remember that. I don't think I was ever exposed to it.
You mean like,
I don't know.
Thigh gaps? Is that?
Yeah, it's kind of like a thigh gap thing.
Isn't that like an eating disorder community thing?
Yes, related. Yeah, here we go. The bikini bridge. This is sort of similar to the thigh gap, defined as when bikini bottoms are suspended between two hip bones, causing a space between the bikini and the lower abdomen.
Okay, that similarly sounds very much like a eating disorder online community toxic
yes.
type of hashtag that has been banned on a lot of social media
It seems
platforms.
that it was definitely a meme. People were posting about it, but perhaps was sort of like a fake or parody of sort of thin-spiration posts. I'm not going to dig too much into this. Suffice it to say that people have considered the protrusion of pelvic bones in recent history, I guess. Pynchon, you've done it again.
I actually lied. I wrote a second note in this section because after Esther angrily storms out, it says that all Schumacher is left with is the ticking of the clock, and I wrote the clock with the underlined 3 times.
Oh, the damn clock.
It's back.
I feel like something that came up for me in these 2 chapters is that like everything we've been talking about is just coming back. It's just coming back.
Keeps coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying it's sort of like a sinusoidal wave where we're returning
I'm
to
going to say
a
the
lot
word
of the same?
sinusoidal wave so many times in this episode.
Take a shot every time Duri says sinusoidal wave.
I just
Don't do
have
that.
sketches of a little wave
Throughout the book.
throughout the book annotated.
Yeah, they need to do a special edition of this book where, you know how nowadays there's like little drawings in the corners of books sometimes that progress as you move through the pages?
Like a
Seen that
flip
on
book?
a couple things. Yeah, it makes a little flip book.
Oh, that's sick.
You know what would make some good cover art for V? Some diagrams. I feel like there's a lot of diagrams going on in this book. That would make some interesting cover art. Just another suggestion. Should they come out with a new edition?
Yeah, maybe they will.
I'm over the black and white.
Should we get back to Profane at Anthro Research?
Anthro Research, yeah.
Where they're still having, Benny is still having conversations with Shroud.
It struck me that his conversations with Shroud were not dissimilar from the conversations he was having with the maybe alligator in the sewer.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to take comfort in chatting with creatures, inanimate objects.
Well, because he still seems to think like this is kind of his free time. He doesn't have to worry about Rachel or the whole sick crew. Like, he's just at work.
He sleeps on Winsome's floor. These are probably the best 8 hours of his day. The
Absolutely.
most peaceful 8 hours, at least.
The most peaceful 8 hours where he's having a conversation with a sort of mannequin human about concentration camps.
I cannot imagine how you could get any sleep on Winsome's floor while Mafia is holding like sex parties in the house.
Pig bursts in at all hours singing, drunk, with whoever else might be there.
We'll get to the dog in a minute.
Yeah, so in this instance, there's a brief conversation. Shroud starts to compare the, quote, acres of old cars piled 10 high in rusting tiers, a graveyard for cars just outside of Elmira, New York on Route 14, to the sort of like stacked bodies in mass graves in concentration camps and the pictures that came out afterwards, after the war.
And there's this really, I think, striking line where Stencil says, Hitler did that. He was crazy.
Benny says that.
Yeah, not Stencil. Sorry, Benny. My bad. Benny says Hitler did that. He was crazy. And then Shroud responds, Hitler, Eichmann, Mengele, all 3 Nazi war criminals. 15 years ago, has it occurred to you that there may be no more standards for crazy or sane now that it's started? And we don't know what it is, but I think it's contributing to this general sense of people are losing it. We've lost standards of kind of morality and what's right and wrong, what's crazy, what's sane.
Well, there was a flop, and Shroud seems to be predicting the flip.
Mm-hmm. And it's got this kind of ominous conclusion where Benny says, what, for Christ's sake? What started?
Yeah, this is an apocalyptic book in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it feels like something is building here in a big way.
I guess just in like the Stencil chapters, and we get sort of the microcosm in this 1956 year in New York of just this like constant ratcheting up of the pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting because the Stencil chapters feel like they are building towards this cataclysmic event, which is actually the gap that is not represented in the book, which is sort of World War I and World War II. Like the apocalypses tend to happen off screen in this book, and what we get instead, it's like if you were to cut off or filter that sine wave so it's just the parts that ramp up, every chapter in this book kind of feels like that.
We're getting, I mean, I guess the ratcheting up in Stencil's chapters all happen before any of the Benny stuff takes place, right? Like this is all post whatever that crescendo is.
Yes, we're getting a glimpse into like several of the rising sine waves.
Yeah, Slab's painting more Danishes.
Yeah, we cut back to the cheese Danishes. There is this interesting passage where Pynchon kind of describes the city a little bit. He says, it was 1 a.m, a wind had risen, and something curious too had happened, as if everyone in the city simultaneously had become sick of news of any kind. For thousands of newspaper pages blew through the small park on the way cross town, blundered like pale bats against the trees, tangled themselves around the feet of Rooney and Rachel and of a bum sleeping across the way. Millions of unread and useless words had come to a kind of life in Sheridan Square, while the two on the bench wove crosstalk of their own, oblivious among them.
The wind is speaking again. Words and language are just flying around.
Not the only ominous wind we get in these 2 chapters, by any means.
That is very true. And like all these newspaper pages blow around, it kind of, I feel like it calls back to the newsreel we got earlier, where it's like there's all of these tragic things happening in the world, but it's like this flood that's kind of overwhelming, and people have just decided to kind of like tune it out and go about their lives and let the news kind of like blow around them. I think we'll, in the next chapter, see a little bit of like more just explicit description of that kind of like retreat from the barrage of horrors that the world is offering.
This is also where Stencil is sitting at the party and thinking about his own reminiscences of Fopple's party back in Mondagon's story, and he's like, he starts thinking about, well, that was a certain kind of whole sick crew back in the day, as I think we identified in the last episode, and he starts thinking about...
we're so smart.
Yeah, we're one chapter ahead of Stencil.
So smart. I just want to give ourselves some credit, you know? He starts thinking about the next generation's crew, and he's like, oh god, it's never gonna stop. There's just always gonna be these fucking people.
The sinusoidal wave. The whole sick crew keeps coming back, reincarnated generation after generation.
The dance of death, as he describes it.
Yeah, they mentioned the dance of death in chapter 9 too.
Yep.
And this idea of kind of like decadence.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, yeah, he had this really like visceral description of Stencil sees here the same leprous pointillism of orris root, weak jaws and bloodshot eyes, tongues and backs of teeth stained purple by this morning's homemade wine, lipstick which it seemed could be peeled off intact, tossed to the earth to join a trail of similar jetsam.
Yeah, so trail of lips?
Yeah, just like this kind of like, just feels kind of icky.
55-year-old Stencil is being very critical of these 25-year-olds right now. We need to remember that he's twice their age, and he's like, and these young kids, this is terrible.
And he
this
walks
reminds
around,
me of German West South Africa.
He's a 55-year-old who walks around referring to himself in the third person and has devoted his entire life to exploring a conspiracy of V that may or may not even exist. So yeah, he's one to talk.
Glass houses, Herbert.
Melancholy guy, as he describes himself.
We cut back to Esther and Schoenmacher very briefly.
Sort of continuing the conversation. This very much feels like we're seeing singular conversations interrupted by other conversations in progress.
Yeah, Esther says, "Who are you to say what my soul looks like?"
Meanwhile, someone else who knows a little about the soul eigenvalue
is the soul dentist.
The soul dentist.
Eigenvalue's right here. He should be the one being like, these fucking kids. And I mean, he does say that. He says, you've got no business with any of these people. And then he says that he likes to think of him, or how he could theoretically be one day a footnote in sort of the greater culture as the guy who provided these people with cheap dental work. And then he's like, if any of them did anything productive ever, I could be a footnote. But as it is, I'm just stuck with them.
This man is so obsessed with dental history. It's hilarious. Like, he really wants to go down in dental history as, in this case, a patron of the arts. But he also has, like, remember his like whole cabinet of like dental
His
historical paraphernalia.
His cabinet of curiosities.
That's a good one.
Yeah, thank you. The funny thing I think about this section is that he is seeing Schoenmacher, who Eigenvalue describes as not a colleague, but as if Stenzel's notion of an inner circle were correct after all, things got around. And there's this extremely funny thing to me where, like, Stenzel putting these pieces together and connecting all of these dots where dots were not connected beforehand has actually connected the dots. And he's like, he sits there and realizes that, like, it is kind of like we're a little inner circle around this V question, but only because someone has like tried to outline one. Like it's a situation of like it's a little bit the opposite of what Mondaugen concludes at the end of that chapter, that as a voyeur, there's a kind of activity of voyeurism, or an activity of putting these pieces together beyond just the world being everything that is the case and everyone passively responding to that world of things that happens without their involvement. Like, Stenzel is doing something through this investigation, even if it is just, at this point, kind of providing this plastic surgeon with some free or discounted dental work.
You mean eigenvalue?
Well, Eigenvalue is providing Schoenmacher, the plastic surgeon, with discounted dental work, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, and continuing our sort of cybernetic theme, he kind of describes the whole sick crew as just sort of like rearranging ideas in sort of like different permutations, and says that like mathematically eventually they're going to run out of arrangements, and this sort of arranging and rearranging is the idea of decadence, but the exhaustion of all possible permutations and combinations was death. And so we have this kind of dance of death imagery again, but like kind of connecting in some way to this like computational idea of like endless combinations and permutations of things, but eventually you run out of bits to combine.
Yeah, this also, I'm realizing, draws the connection between why Rooney, in the song that he sings about his own life, describes it as a decky dance. We have the decky dance and we have the dance of death as two competing dances in world history. One of them is the production of different possibilities, and the other one is the collapse or the exhaustion of those possibilities.
Eigenvalue is a little freaked out by this idea, and so he decides to comfort himself by looking at his dentures.
As we all do.
As we all do.
And metals endure. Although
Yes.
if teeth endured, he wouldn't have a job. So teeth don't endure. Metal teeth endure.
I guess you see teeth on like skulls and stuff, you know, dead things.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
know.
I guess
Yeah.
they endure as much as any bone endures. They just like don't always work in living beings.
Yeah.
His emotional support dentures.
Do we have any more? We've got
Back to McClintock.
Back to McClintock. He goes on a trip to Cape Cod.
He lives a Dogs in a Pile song here for a few minutes as he drives through the Northeast drinking rum with some random musicians he meets along the way.
Now I got a link to that in the show notes.
If Dogs in a Pile want to come on the pod and talk about McClintock's sphere,
He sort of remains faithful to Ruby even after kind of being propositioned.
By Eunice.
Eunice.
Eunice seems
Yeah, at
nice.
this house party. Yeah.
But someone who isn't Eunice, Harvey Fazo, asks him if he has a wife in New York. And he says something like that.
Yeah, so then he goes back to Ruby, and she looks like she's about to like leave town. She sort of packed up a suitcase. He says a quarter of an hour the wrong way, and he would have missed her. And she seems upset. She cries. She throws a slip at him. It's still a little unclear exactly what's going on with Ruby, but she unpacks her suitcase and I guess decides to stay.
Indeed so. They got to continue this sort of rambling conversation about her relationship with her father and his relationship to flip-flopping. It's gone so well for so many weeks thus far.
Indeed. And then we get to the St. Bernard.
The St. Bernard
Poor St. Bernard.
Charisma and Fu crashed into the room, drunk and singing English vaudeville songs. With them was a St. Bernard they had found in the street, drooling and sick. Evenings were hot this August. Oh God, Profane said into the phone. The roaring boys are back.
Who's Profane speaking on the phone with, Patrick?
Seems to be one Rachel Owlglass.
Ooh.
And what does Rachel do?
That ooh you just did in the microphone cut completely by your microphone's
No.
noise gate.
I want the listeners to know I did an ooh, but not like a spook ooh, like a
Yeah, run that back.
Ooh.
Take that from. Take that one more time.
Ooh. Did that one get recorded?
That it cut a little
Mostly.
bit, but it's better.
Okay, I'm trying to do like a middle school or like a Full House like
Ooh.
Uncle or a Full
Ooh.
House like Uncle Jesse was kissing Aunt Becky
Oh, I
in
see.
the
So
kids'
we should
seat.
all do it. We should all do an
do like a-
ooh, like
like,
the
yeah.
light comes on in the audience. All right. Ooh.
Ooh.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. I think saying the roaring boys are back is really funny. I laughed out loud at that line.
And Rachel is like kissing the mouthpiece of her phone. So I feel like she and Benny are getting a little...
How could you kiss an object? Profane wonders. Or the narrator wonders. Or both of them wonder. Or Rachel wonders.
Someone wonders.
Do you think that Benny is opening up to a possibility of a relationship with Rachel finally? Earlier when Rachel and Rooney were sitting in a park, I was very tense because I was like, if they hook up and it's not Rachel and Benny, I'm going to stop reading this book.
Your OTP, one true
my
pairing.
You want this, will
OTP,
they, won't they?
I need Rachel and Benny to end up together. But do we think he's opening himself up to this relationship because he, A, knows that Rachel is into her car, thus into a machine, and he's, B, at his job, been introduced to a inanimate schlemiel, and he now believes himself worthy because he is simultaneously thinking of himself as a schlemiel constantly and also is kind of inanimate. He's like, maybe I am her type after all. He's so down on himself that it's like benefiting him again.
It's wrapped back around to being
Yes, the horseshoe.
to a certain kind of confidence.
The horseshoe of are you confident enough to talk to this woman has wrapped. Yeah, we've passed the peak of the loop to loop.
The hero's journey has we've gone on with Benny. Perhaps. Yeah, it's also werewolf season.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I don't
That just kind of showed up
It's
there.
August.
I don't know, but it's August. Werewolf season.
They really
colon,
paint August in a bad light.
I mean, when you're in New York City, I bet August is the worst.
Like pre-air conditioning.
Yeah.
Add Taylor Swift to the Pynchon Pals playlist. Get August on there. Slips away
So
like a
this
bottle
poor
of wine.
dog
Oh,
is
God.
really suffering, and Charisma and Fu decide that what it needs is beer. And so they put a bunch of beer in a bowl for this dog.
In a bucket.
A bucket for the dog. The dog
But St. Bernard,
drinks
it needs
the
a lot of beer.
Yeah, and then he throws up. So this dog is really having quite a bad day.
Everyone in this apartment is having a bad day.
We also get introduced to a new Holsick crew member, the transient race car driver, Murray Sable, who seems
I
to
wanna
just
know
be
more about Murray Sable.
He seems to just be crashing with a woman on Winsome's floor because Winsome runs a boarding house. But yeah, he's only in these 2 pages, and he seems cool.
Yeah, there are things under the city. One character says alligators, daft priests, bums in subways.
Yeah, that comes as sort of a larger section where it's Benny and still on the phone with Rachel, but he's questioning of whether I guess he is still himself on the other side of the phone after the wires, like sort of after his sound is routed through the wires that run under the city into her earpiece, if it's still him.
Which she has just kissed.
Which he's just kissed. And then he absolutely blows it because he says, call me at midnight. And she's like, of course I will, baby. And he says, no, actually, I need a wake up call. I broke my alarm. And she's like, oh, yeah, I guess I can logistically call you at midnight as well. Not just because you want to talk to me again in a couple hours.
Oh, Benny.
Benny. We get into our description of yo-yoing, which we already kind of
Yeah,
talked
we
about.
already discussed the yo-yoing.
Patreon stretch goal, we go get hammered in New York and ride the metro as long as possible.
We do a live vlog of our yo-yo experience.
This is Pynchon Pal's contributed the equivalent of like a charity stream where we just get plastered until we're arrested.
I don't really think I would be very good at yo-yoing because I tend to fall asleep on trains when I'm completely sober.
As long as you wake up once per transit.
As long as you wake up, you're fine.
Look, if the metro becomes, if the subway becomes free in New York, it wouldn't even cost us that much money.
Oh.
And Stencil has an experience on the subway. He decides, I'm trying to remember exactly what happens here, but he decides to try yo-yoing.
This is so Stencil.
Yes, very upper crusty Stencil-esque way.
Yeah, so he like gets on the train during rush hour, or he gave the advice. He was like, get in there at rush hour. There are 9 million yo-yos in this town, referring to like all the commuters going back and forth to work. And then he says he took his own advice one evening after 5, came out with one rib to his umbrella broken and a vow never to do it again. And then he has this really haunting description of the subway as vertical corpses, eyes with no life, crowded loins, buttocks, and hip points together, which I feel like evoked some of the imagery of the piles of bodies in concentration camps. Now that I'm reading that out loud, also like we get these like this pelvic bone imagery again.
Well, there's a lot of skeletons in this chapter, just generally. There's the skeleton in Shroud, there's Esther's skeleton, there's these skeletons.
Yeah, like I feel like reading this, I'm getting even more wigged out by Schoenmacher, who's like kind of suggesting like turning Esther into like a more skeletal figure.
Mm-hmm. Experimenting with her, you know, in point of fact.
Yeah, but like also making her appear more like emaciated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Stencil reflects, was it the dance of death brought up to date? This sort of like endless commute on the subway with all of these bodies kind of stacked in there.
Yeah.
And then guess who's back?
Hi, Paula.
Paula's back. We have not seen her in a while. People keep referring to her. She's not there. But Paula's back. I wrote that in my notes. Paula's back.
And what's she got? She has the key to everything.
Key to everything. This is where De Chirico's painting comes up. Paula sort of pins Stencil between the black fireplace and a print of De Chirico's street.
And hands him a small packet of typewritten pages. Confessions, the title. Confessions of Fausto Maestral.
Who is her dad.
Mm-hmm. And Stencil, it says that Stencil has stayed off Malta. Like, this is the one thread that he hasn't followed up on is like, well, my father mysteriously disappeared in Malta. I'll get to that one later. Before then, I've really got to go check out this toy company / weapons manufacturer.
Yeah, it seems like he's been avoiding something.
I need to yo-yo in an academic fashion to see if it helps.
And so he's a little scared of Malta. That's why he's been kind of scared of Paula. I wanted to say one more thing about De Chirico's painting while we're here, which, as I was reading about it online, one of the things that was brought up was that the perspectives in the painting are contradictory. So, like, the way the light is shining and the way the buildings are situated, like, it doesn't actually, like, line up as a realistic sort of painting of a street in a city. Like, there's sort of, like, two different perspectives. And
what are you saying about the perspectives of one Herbert Stencil?
Indeed. I was like, anyways, yeah, I called back to like these different like contradictory perspectives, the way Pynchon writes, where we're hearing about like one particular event or moment in time from all these different perspectives, and they don't always align exactly with each other. And also with all this like mirror imagery that we're getting, where you have kind of like the real world and the dream world. De Chirico's street really has like this sort of like shadow world. You don't actually see any subjects. You only see the shadows that are kind of like projected into this dream world. This painting really brought it home for me. Really should be the cover art.
Paintings are expensive to license.
Surely this is like in the public domain now.
The Chirico, he died in 1978, it looks like. So,
okay, so
I
maybe
think we got a little while.
Not yet in the public domain.
Yeah. Do we have anything else to say about this chapter before we maybe take a break and then launch into chapter 11? Rachel
and Profane are officially on a date. And Stencil's surprised by that info. He says, Profane, ?
We're all surprised by that information.
We're all surprised. I agree. But huge.
But good for Profane. I'm rooting for him.
Surely he won't mess it up.
Surely this time. Maybe this time.
And they're going to another party at the end of it. Slab's having a party.
When is Slab not having a party?
They guess they'll be there, Stencil and Paula.
Okay.
All right. We will be right back after a brief break. See you on the other side. Are we ready to return to Pynchon?
Yeah, let's return to Pynchon. Chapter 11.
Chapter 11. Confessions of Fausto Maestral.
I didn't even say, and we're back yet, but I'm leaving that in regardless.
And we're back.
We're back.
Would y'all this is a weird chapter, and once again, I do have a summary. It kind of doesn't mention 80% of what happens in this chapter, but would y'all like it anyway?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
All right. Chapter 11, Confessions of Fausto Maestral. In this first-person chapter, we read the apologia of Fausto Maestral written to his daughter, Paula, wherein he quotes liberally from his own writings across, as he frames it, 4 different personal historical lives, Fausto the First through the 4th. I later realized, reading about this, that there is not yet, and may never be, a Fausto the Fifth, or V. Anyways, before World War II, Fausto the First, would-be priest, Marat, the would-be politician, and Danubietna, the would-be engineer, were poets in the loosely defined School of Anglo-Maltese Poetry, or the Generation of 37. He meets a woman named Elena Shimshi and fathers Paula, ending his priesthood, and beginning the life of Fausto II. Fausto IV is the current model, born from the return of a consciousness that fled from Fausto III in response to the deaths of Elena, who had been in contact with an Englishman named Stencil, and of the Bad Priest, a figure we eventually recognize as an inanimate hybrid woman preaching to Malta's little girls about becoming nuns and to its little boys about becoming as the broken rocks that litter the besieged city. Total non-humanity. Reading this, Stencil realizes he must follow his father's footsteps and finally venture to Malta.
Let me just say I loved this chapter.
Same. It has.
You were talking it up.
It has. Have you guys seen the new Mark Ruffalo HBO TV show Task?
No.
I thought the trailers did not impress me. We literally watched them. We were like, I don't know. Is it that worth watching?
I enjoyed it. I mean, it's like 7 episodes. It's not the biggest commitment in the world. But it's got Task vibes, and it's also got Dune Messiah vibes, and that's a fun combo.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
The important, I guess, for the listener, or for you guys, because you're not going to... The Task vibes is that Mark Ruffalo's character is an ex-priest turned FBI agent, which is really... And also has a lot of family issues. That's where this reference comes in.
That character concept sounds extremely up my alley, so maybe they should have put that in the trailer.
It gets dropped in there. It's not like a spoiler.
I love it when cops have to wrestle with faith in police procedurals.
I will also ask, so at risk of jumping right into it, there's this passage about poets writing autobiographies of themselves. And it says, we can justify any apologia simply by calling life a successive rejection of personalities. No apologia is any more than a romance, half a fiction, in which all successive identities taken on and rejected by the writer as a function of linear time are treated as separate characters. The writing itself even constitutes another rejection, another character added to the past. Does that mean that Fausto V is the author of this piece? That Fausto IV is the last character that occurs? Because we get descriptions on like 2 pages later after that passage.
Yeah, you're
of
so
1
right.
through 4, but I think 5 is the author writing about 1 through 4.
Which takes us right back to the real life of Sebastian Knight by Nabokov, writing under the pseudonym V. V is the author all along.
Interesting. Yeah, it took me a bit into this chapter to realize that all these Faustos were indeed the same person, just in different life stages.
And I was definitely convinced that Paula had a twin who was Fausto Jr. at one point, because it says...
I also had that thought.
I mean, the sentence
Fausto refers... he refers to himself in third person, like Stencil does.
Yeah, the sentence Maestral II arrived with you, child, and with the war makes it sound like there was twins. And I was like, oh, twin drama. But no.
Totally. I had the same thought. Did you feel like this passage that you just read, Andrew? I felt like we got very like meta. We were talking about like kind of the role of writing in the world. It says, so we do sell our souls, paying them away to history in little installments. It isn't so much to pay for eyes clear enough to see past the fiction of continuity, the fiction of cause and effect, the fiction of a humanized history endowed with reason. And I kind of took that bit as like writing is what allows us to sort of see over the crests of this like sinusoidal waves of history. Like writing gives us that clear view of history, seeing past like the valley of the sine wave.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this chapter revolves around the question of writing and the question of like poetry specifically, and like what is the use or the value of poets and poetry to a society or to culture, which is a question that people have asked as far back as Plato expelled the poets from the ideal city in the Republic. And again, sort of jumping ahead a little bit, what at least several of the Faustos conclude is that poetry gives meaning. It makes up and propagates this kind of meaningfulness of history and its events, which otherwise happen just through the cold mechanical processes of history and objects bouncing off of one another and objects destroying one another, into whose grand arc humanity is just sort of tossed around. And so what poetry ends up doing is naming and giving reason and inspiring this sense of cause and effect through metaphor, through images. This is what he comes to think.
Yeah, and I think he says, I don't know exactly where this is, but he says like poetry connects us to like the senses, like our sort of like gut feelings, which is maybe, you know, poetry is kind of rooted in the animacy of these events, like how we like feel in our bodies rather than the sort of like inanimate motion of objects through history.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like we might be getting some insight into like Pynchon's views on writing in this chapter.
He also makes a comment a little bit before that section that we both just read from, that every poet has to at some point write an autobiography, or has to write an autobiography, and that they can only do it when they're quote, virtually certain of the hour of his death. Could there be a Pynchon autobiography coming now that he's in his 80s? Has he been teeing it up for 60 years?
He does. I do know this. He has allegedly donated like a pretty significant archive to, I don't remember exactly what university, but like there is a Pynchon archive whose contents are to be opened after his death. I don't know if it's like immediately after or at some point in time after, but my understanding is that there is in fact an archive of correspondence and all sorts of stuff.
This chapter starts off with like a really detailed description of the room that Fausto is in.
The worst room.
It does seem like the worst room. What did you all think of the room?
It is highly detailed in its description, but not in actually having anything in it. Yeah, I mean, he talks about, I guess this goes along with him being a priest, that you kind of he says in the first sentence, it only takes a desk and writing supplies to turn any room into a confessional. And then you get this description of this room that is not prison-like in its sort of sparsity, and that he is just as, I guess, Fausto 5 writing this extended piece and kind of occasionally looking out over the city from this bombed out ruin.
Yeah, and he says, like, the room is somewhat, like, necessary for writing this apologia. Like, he says, so must there be a room sealed against the present before we can make any attempt to deal with the past. So he needs to be, like, removed in some way in this sort of, like, gray, unadorned room to be able to, like, reckon with his history.
Yeah, and the history is sort of out the window, but you have to turn towards it in order to look at it. Parts of this reminded me of this book, Queer Phenomenology by Sarah Ahmed, which gets referenced a lot in sort of contemporary continental philosophy and literary theory discussions. But one of the things that Ahmed writes about is that a lot of phenomenology in continental philosophy, especially after Heidegger and Husserl, talk a lot about orientation and intentionality, the idea that you can't just think or you can't just see, but you have to think about something or you have to see something. There's always like an object of any kind of perception or phenomenon. And if you look at the history of philosophy, and especially the history of kind of straight heterosexual white Western male philosophy, there is like an orientation towards the writing desk and away from basically all other aspects of domesticity. Like Ahmed writes about this, there's a whole house or hotel or boarding house or whatever that is behind the philosopher, but the philosopher is privileged enough to be focused solely on the writing desk and the philosophy that is happening on it. And this description of the room feels akin to that kind of characterization of the orientation of the writer toward the process of writing, where the world is closed off, kind of visible, but only at an angle.
I guess maybe on that subject of writing, we have a lot of literary references in this chapter.
Yeah, specifically to like a lot of English literature. T.S. Eliot comes up, and
yeah, they reference The Hollow Men, which is one of my favorite poems.
All of these three poets, Marat, Danubietna, and Fausto, are all kind of trying to ape the style of these sort of turn of the century English poets.
Yeah, they talk about Shakespeare also.
Yeah.
De Chirico apparently has a novel also in addition to painting.
Who knew?
I did not know.
So we should probably also clarify that like Malta at this time is like part of the British Empire. And so a large part of this chapter is dedicated to reflections on the siege of Malta during World War II, where the Axis powers sort of tried to take control of Malta, which off the coast of Italy and in the Mediterranean was like a really valuable strategic point that the British were attempting to fend off throughout several years of the war.
Yeah, it had been a colony for like well over 100 years at this point, I think. Or yeah, by the actions of World War II. And then if we sort of kick back to when Sidney Stencil passed away, he dies during the June disturbances, which back to episode 1 is when we talked about that the last time, is when Italy was sort of doing a whisper campaign to try to bring Malta into the Italian, bring it under as an Italian colony, take it back from the British, or take it from the British.
Which now it is its own independent country, of course. And sort of, I don't know if it's technically a city-state or not, but island, nation, city-state, somewhere like that.
I feel like this chapter, like, took a step back. Like, this is not a character that we, like, actually meet in person. Like, we only encounter this character through this apologia. Ostensibly, this character has already passed away. And I feel like he kind of philosophizes a lot of the things that have been continually like hinted at or alluded to throughout the rest of this book. I felt like Fausto was like really bringing them home and like hitting the point in a big way. For example, there's this passage where he is kind of writing to Paola, and he says, "The journals, I mean, of Fausto 1 and 2, what other way can there be to regain him as a must? Here, for example." And then he like goes into this passage that talks about exactly the sort of historical sine wave that we've been hitting on throughout these chapters. How wondrous is this St. Giles fair called history. Her rhythms pulse regular and sinusoidal, a freak show and caravan traveling over thousands of little hills, a serpent hypnotic and undulant bearing on her back like infinitesimal fleas, such as hunchbacks, dwarves, prodigies, centaurs, poltergeists, two-headed, three-headed, hopelessly in love, satyrs with the skin of werewolves, werewolves with the eyes of young girls, and perhaps even an old man with a navel of glass, through which can be seen goldfish nuzzling the coral country of his guts. And so we have like this like explicit description of this sort of like history sine wave. And then like we kind of go into, I was curious to hear your all's takes on this sort of like reflection on werewolves. Again, the werewolves are coming back.
A lot of werewolves.
Werewolves are the key to all of this.
We've got more naval stuff. Like you remember our belly button boy from several episodes ago?
The screw.
We get, I mean, even more belly button. It's not a sentence I thought I would say. We get a lot of belly button.
A lot of things in belly buttons.
Did we mention that the structure of this chapter, or that we're reading sort of this framed letter, but he spends lots of time sort of quoting his own earlier journal entries. So you sort of get this back and forth between the current Fausto writing, and he's often referencing events in the past and then quoting either his previous journals or sometimes the works of his friends, basically like citing his sources for what he's saying in the present tense.
Well, it's interesting because this chapter is in the first person because it is actually presented as like, this is the manuscript. This is not, unlike the other kind of stencil flavored chapters, this is not like a stencilized version of the manuscript. This seems to be, in the context of the narrative, sort of what is written on the page. And then what is written on the page also quotes what is written on other pages.
And like stencil, Fausto has also divided himself into like multiple identities. And even explicitly says that there's this false assumption that identity is single, soul continuous.
Which, now that I think about it, to go back to Dan's question from the start of the episode about the singular identity of V, seems like we might be building towards something that there is in the singular identity of V a multiplicity of identities that are broken up across history, but that all cohere into a singular kind of figure who appears at various points.
I might have more thoughts on this later on.
I've got more thoughts about this first person thing too. Because I think there's something going on.
Tell us about it.
What's going on, Andrew?
I don't want to skip too far ahead, but when we get to that section, when Sydney Stencil shows up and Sydney prevents Elena from... Sydney prevents Fausto's mom from committing suicide. Is, wait for it, Sydney Fausto's father? Because they both talk in first person.
And they both, they refer to themselves in third person.
So does Stencil, is Stencil related to Paola?
I think...
Which would make Paola Stencil's niece.
Yes, if Fausto and Stencil are half-brothers.
Right.
There's not a lot of evidence, but there's also not a lot of evidence against it.
Evidence.
Because we already see, Faust, there's no evidence. That's all I'll say.
That's intriguing. I hadn't considered that. Yeah, I guess we still don't know who who Herbert's mother is in the first place, so could be the same mom, too, for all we know.
True, yeah, they could just be siblings.
They could just be siblings.
Hmm.
Yeah, let's see. Do we have anything?
It's hard to hop through this chapter because it does not follow like a linear plot at all. It's like it's a collection of thoughts.
Yeah, I want to point out at the start here, I know at least two names I looked up to see if they had any significance. Danubietna is, let me make sure I'm getting this right, it is a quotation from the Lord's Prayer in Maltese, and I think it's specifically our sins.
That's interesting because he references the Lord's Prayer, like he has a line from the Lord's Prayer elsewhere in this chapter.
And then meanwhile, his
and also, wait, one more thing. Sorry, the Holloman, which he references, also has a line of the Lord's Prayer in it. Just throwing that out there again. So it shows up actually like 3 times in the Holloman. He quotes a segment of the Lord's Prayer, and then I guess it shows up in this name. I didn't realize that.
Meanwhile, Elena Shemshi, and I tried looking up the International Phonetic Alphabet for this surname, means like sunny or sun or sunshine in Maltese. So
and
again,
we have a lot of discussions of the sun.
We have
later.
a lot of discussions with the sun, and also Paula's mother's surname is the sun.
And I mean,
and
it says that Mistral is a seasonal wind that blows, and there's again a lot of wind.
Yeah. There's like 2 different seasonal competing winds that that blow. Also, sort of like a flip and a flop situation. We also learn, correct me if I read this wrong, but like Paula has another name besides Paula. Did I read that wrong?
Where are you looking?
Yeah, where?
I'm trying to find it. Maybe I'll see it when we get there. And if not,
I'd believe it if it were true.
If not, well, because I was reading it, and it either means like her mother's name, or that I don't know. I was sort of half expecting her name to start with V at some point. Maybe we'll see it when we get there. And if we don't see it, maybe I'll just cut this meditation.
Do we want to just like surface some interesting thoughts that come up here?
Yeah, I mean that's
only if you have some.
Us sort of surfing over these sinusoidal waves to get to the actual plot at the end of the second half of this chapter might be the way to go.
The way to go. One thought I would like to surface was when he was reflecting on British colonialism. He said, perhaps British colonialism has produced a new sort of being, a dual man aimed 2 ways at once, toward peace and simplicity on the one hand, towards an exhausted intellectual searching on the other. And I feel like this, once again, like reminded me of like, we've got time and mirror time. We have this like divergence in a V. We've got the flip. We've got the flop. This idea that one person is holding sort of like dual identities.
Yeah, which is also reminds me of it's Stencil, I think, who thinks about this at the first sick crew party we're introduced to. And what was his name? Brad? The guy that Brad, Esther was flirting with? Or we all remember Brad. We're just waiting for Brad to become relevant again. But Stencil thinks of him as like a split man, where he has one foot in this kind of bohemian lifestyle and one foot in a comfortable bourgeois upbringing and future, and at some point it will split him down the middle. Yeah, these like divided men keep coming up. The thing that I was trying to find about Paula's name comes, y'all have different editions, but for me it's on page 314 after a block of quotation from one of Fausto's journals that starts, "How could she marry anyone? She was fit, said the bad priest." This is about the bad priest kind of influencing Elena to marry Fausto.
We should talk more about who the bad priest is.
Indeed, we should. But Fausto, in the present day of this manuscript, writes, "These, poor child, are the sad events surrounding your given name. It is a different name now that you've been carried off by the U.S. Navy. But beneath that accident, you are still Mistral Shemshi, a terrible misalliance." So maybe that refers to her surname as being like Maestral
like,
Shemshi, but given name sounds like first name to me. So I'm not sure.
I mean, yeah, unless it just means like I still can't find that section. Your page numbers are so far off from me and Duri's. But unless it just means that now that you are not sort of tied to Malta, the meaning of the name has changed as opposed to the actual word. But I can see what you're getting at there.
And she didn't take Pappy Hod's name.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I have another thought I'd like to surface.
Yeah, please.
As we're kind of skimming over the high level. Another thing that stood out to me in our copy, it's on page 340. Fausto says, but the excerpt shows clearly a charming quality of youth, to begin with optimism, and once the inadequacy of optimism is borne in on him by an inevitably hostile world, to retreat into abstractions even in the midst of the bombing. And then later on, he talks about how this sort of retreat into abstractions can lead to a sort of like non-humanity or inanimacy. And I feel like we get this chain. We've been talking about these themes, but Fausto is almost outlining this chain of like how a young person sort of progresses from optimism to being exposed to the sort of like hostility of the world, and then trying to retreat into these like abstractions, these proper nouns, like distancing ourselves. I thought about the newspapers floating around people's feet while they try to like retreat from the world. And then that leads to this sort of like decadence or like non-humanity because we've like retreated too far and are no longer viewing like these events as like human and are viewing it more as like a cycle or an abstracted cycle. And I'm just thinking like we're kind of like the partridge on that tree in Cheese Danish number 35, where we kind of abstract so far that like we're part of the cycle and we don't realize how to fly out of it until we get impaled. Did that make any sense?
Yeah.
I feel like I was Herbert stenciling for a moment there.
No, I think in a good way though. Yeah, I think for Fausto, he talks about how the sort of traumas of his life sort of split him into his different eras, to use a popular word in 2025.
Is Taylor Swift the modern Fausto?
She might be.
Confessions of Taylor Swift.
Yes, much like Taylor went through a lot of high-profile breakups until she found her one.
And only Travis Kelce.
Exactly. Fausto went through several similar tragedies, such as the war breaking out and his wife being killed.
Tragedy.
Such as being a priest.
And then, well, I guess his transition from 3 to 4, it just says basically was a factor of time. But he does make a comment at one point that his father's death would have caused a younger man to split, but because he was already so sort of jaded, it didn't happen that time for him.
Yeah, there's another time where he says that he would have had another split if he had been more of a nationalist, that there are these like psychosocial factors that when events happen, like could be start of a new era, or maybe not.
Should we talk about Fausto's relationship to the priesthood?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the young Fausto is a priest poet. And he's friends with an engineer poet and a politician poet.
Did he become a priest, or was he just aspiring to become a priest?
It sounded like he never quite made it, is the vibe I got.
That was kind of unclear to me, too. Yeah, it seems like maybe he hadn't taken his vows yet, but like he had studied enough to know how to perform certain rites that we later see in the chapter.
There's a quote.
I don't know enough about the actual process of becoming a priest to say for certain.
There's a quote that I'm probably going to have to paraphrase because I'm not going to be able to find it. But he basically says early on to Paola that she and Elena like wouldn't be part of this story if he'd been better at his job. So that makes it sound like he didn't get there personally.
Yeah, because he got together with Elena, which sort of ended this vision of being a priest. obviously because he violated his celibacy. And there's this moment that I felt like really called back to our good friend Victoria Wren, where he tries to sort of like justify his sleeping with Elena and describes, says, church-approved copulation for the purpose and glorification of motherhood. And I felt like that was reminding me of how like Victoria was sort of like justifying to herself her sexual exploits by comparing different men to Christ.
There's another quote a little bit later on where he's in the bar with the new Jubieta, and he asks Fausto, like, why haven't you blessed the wine? Like, you need to bless the wine. And he says, basically, see if you can find it. I can't find it. I've got too many notes in here. But he says,
yeah.
Now God and I have an agreement. Fausto began as if to correct a misapprehension. He will forget about my not answering his call if I cease to question. Simply survive, you see. So this is him in his depths of the Fausto. This is Fausto 2. This is the depths of Fausto 2. Day of 13 air raids.
Do we feel like his name has significance?
They said that Fausto means happy.
Is it related to Faust?
Yeah, let's see. Faust?
Fausto's like a real name though, isn't it?
Yes. Who in the sort of story goes that he makes a deal with the devil for infinite knowledge. Which works poorly for him.
The name Fausto comes from the Latin word Faustus, translating to lucky or fortunate. So someone who is not lucky or fortunate, named Fausto, I guess is the irony there.
Which also brings us back to Machiavelli talks a lot about virtue or virtu in response to fortuna or fortune.
Don't they explicitly talk about the wheel of fortune?
Yeah, they talk about the wheel of fortune / wheel of fate, and also the river fortune, which are all of these sort of medieval, classical, and modern interpretations of the idea that, you know, sometimes you're at the top of the wheel of fortune or wheel of fate and everything is going all right, and sometimes it tramples you. But
you're on a sine wave?
Like you're on a sine wave, precisely. In fact, I drew a little diagram in my book.
I did too.
Of the sine wave here, but that I think it's the children of Malta, or maybe it's just the Maltese. Yeah, it's the Maltese in general who imagine this wheel as being horizontal, so that it is not cyclical. It's just sort of ever turning. It doesn't produce a sine wave.
I thought they viewed it as vertical.
Where is
like
it?
A yo-yo. Because this is towards the end of the chapter, right? We're talking about the Wheel of Fortune. Am I in the same passage as you?
So I guess we can talk about the children briefly, and maybe that can bring us into talking about the bad priest. Yeah, sorry, we skipped way ahead
with our Wheel of Fortune.
But they...
Maybe we need to build to the Wheel of Fortune.
Okay, we'll turn back to the Wheel of Fortune once we get to the end.
We want to talk about sort of the motherhood and the Malta and the fatherhood and the rocks.
Yeah. Let's talk about Malta and the rocks.
That's a theme that is nonstop. Which is basically, they talk a lot about Malta being a matriarchal society, about mothers being second only to priests at one point as far as respectability, importance. And they often talk about Malta, the island, as sort of a collective mother matriarchal figure. And then similarly talk a lot about sort of fathers needing to be hard like rocks and sort of also
sheltering like rocks.
Yeah, like we get a lot of debris imagery towards the end as the bombing continues.
The rocks keep being broken and turning into smaller rocks.
And meanwhile, there's this sort of like collective of children that sort of, I guess, like children of Malta, if you will, that as like, you know, people are having to like hide out underground during all of this bombing, the children are sort of running in kind of like a roving band under the street. There's a lot of time spent under the streets as people are camping out from the
air raids.
From the bombs. Yeah, the air raids.
And they're playing make-believe with as like fighter pilots and stuff. They're like running around with their arms outstretched like the Messerschmitts and the Spitfires.
Yeah, and so ostensibly, like, Paula spent her early years, like, running with this sort of, like, gang of kids as Malta was being bombed.
And specifically, she pretends to be, do you remember?
An Italian dirigible.
An Italian dirigible, which Fausto describes as, where is it? You were usually, I believe, an Italian dirigible, the most buoyant balloon girl in the stretch of sewer we occupied that season.
Balloon girl!
A balloon girl. Here we go. We finally know what it means. It's a girl pretending to be a balloon. Balloons come up a couple of different times here, I think, in this chapter. I'm probably not going to be able to find exactly where they come up. But the children have this interesting philosophy, Fausto writes. I'll quote this chapter, or this section, because I think it's particularly revealing. They do this kind of, as Fausto puts it, poetry in a vacuum. Paula, my child, Elena's child, but most of all Malta's, you were one of them. These children knew what was happening, knew that bombs killed. But what's a human after all? No different from a church, obelisk, statue. Only one thing matters. It's the bomb that wins. Their view of death was non-human. One wonders if our grown-up attitudes, hopelessly tangled as they were with love, social forms, and metaphysics, worked any better. Certainly there was more common sense about the children's way. And so part of this worldview that the children develop is obviously in response to the war, but is also due to the influence of the bad priest, who also is a large part of the reason that Elena decided to keep her child with Fausto in the first place.
Can we introduce who the bad priest is?
Please do.
Pynchon does not really introduce who the bad priest is for a long time in this chapter and just keeps referring to this bad priest.
We get some philosophy sprinkled in.
Yeah.
The first exposure we get to it, right, is when, like, Elena kind of consults with this bad priest about whether or not she should keep her child.
Mm-hmm.
The child being Paula.
And this is, there's a discussion here of sort of abortion in the context of like humanity and non-humanity, and at what point matter becomes human, or humanity is imbued with a kind of animacy, which is something the Catholic Church remains very concerned about.
I don't think there's a single political issue that Pynchon does not touch on in the course of this novel, V.
You really, it's all the hot button topics for sure. Each of which has remained relevant.
As though history is a sinusoidal wave.
Indeed. So yeah, we are introduced to this bad priest, and then the bad priest shows up occasionally later throughout the chapter, in contrast to Father Avalanche?
Father Avalanche,
Father
a great
Avalanche.
name.
Who seems more or less like a perfectly fine priest that people like. Not at all a bad priest.
What do you think makes this priest bad?
What indeed?
I was a little confounded by the bad priest. That's why I keep asking questions about the bad priest.
Let's see. I'm trying to find... So one of the clearest examples we get of what the bad priest is preaching comes here, and this is during the section where Fausto is writing about the priest's relationship to Elena. Now, sin for Elena Shimshi had been heretofore as natural a function as breathing, eating, or gossiping. Again, kind of standard Catholic stuff. Under the agile instruction of the bad priest, however, it began to take the shape of an evil spirit, alien, parasitic, attached like a black slug to her soul. And then Fausto, the current Fausto of the manuscript, quotes from an earlier Fausto. How could she marry anyone? She was fit, said the bad priest, not for the world, but for the convent. Christ was her proper husband. No human male could coexist with the sin which fed on her girl soul. Only Christ was mighty enough, loving enough, forgiving enough. Had he not cured the lepers and exorcised malignant fevers? Only he could welcome disease, clasp it to his bosom, rub against it, kiss it. It had been his mission on earth as now, a spiritual husband in heaven, to know sickness intimately, love it, cure it. There was a parable, the bad priest told her, metaphor for spirit's cancer, but the Maltese mind, conditioned by its language, is unreceptive to such talk. All my Elena saw was the disease, the literal sickness, afraid I or our children would reap its ravages. And so the influence of this bad priest kind of alienates Elena from the sort of regular priest on the island, Father Avalanche, and also Fausto himself, this sort of metastasis of sin that she believes is festering within her.
Where have we seen this philosophy of Christ as the ultimate husband before?
Our good old friend Victoria Wren.
Our good old friend Victoria Wren, once almost a nun herself.
I feel like this also harkens back a little bit to Schoenmacher, who like views himself as the only person that could bring out the perfect idea of Esther.
Yeah, that, and also, I mean, there's echoes here too of Father Faring and the rats.
Or Father Faring.
The last priest we encountered. And the sort of like one rat who had genuine goodness in her soul. What's Veronica?
Veronica.
Took me a minute. There's so many V's in this book.
There's so many V's. Valletta is a new V.
Valletta is a new V. That's
V
true.
alert.
Valletta. We also talk a lot in this chapter about vocation.
Vocation, yeah.
Another V. Each of these three like friends, poets, has a particular vocation, although not all of them succeed in achieving their vocation.
Yeah, so we were talking about mothers, and Carla Maestral appears at this point.
And this is Fausto's mother.
Fausto's mother. Andrew, did you have something to say about the motherhood of Fausto's mother?
The motherhood of Fausto's mother?
Or her relationship to this theme of motherhood you introduced a minute ago.
I should. Now
She's
I feel
a mom.
completely on the spot. We get this passage here about Malta, again, as a mother, and that the Italians have been attempting to deflower the island of Malta, the capital in Mother Malta, since June when the bombing started.
Mother is mothering, as they say in Malta.
Yes, exactly. It says she lies on her back.
Funny joke for our Gen Z audience.
I bet it'll do numbers.
Yeah.
Malta is a noun, feminine and proper. Italians have indeed been attempting her defloration since the 8th of June. She lies on her back in the sea, sullen, an immemorial woman, spread to the explosive orgasms of Mussolini bombs. But her soul hasn't been touched, cannot be. Her soul is the Maltese people who wait, only wait, down in her clefts and catacombs alive, and with a numb strength filled with faith in God, his church.
So this is when Italy, led by Mussolini, is trying to take over Malta from the British.
Yeah, the beginning of the siege of Malta in the Second World War.
Gotcha.
And it's
and it is also... Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to just say it's right after that we get the Sydney illusion. Womb of rock, what subterranean confessions we wandered into. Carla must have told him at some point of the circumstances surrounding his birth. It had been near the time of the June disturbances in which old Maestral was involved. Precisely how never came clear, but deeply enough to alienate Carla both from him and from herself. Enough so that one night we both nearly took a doomed acrobat's way down the steps at the harbor end of Street San Giovanni. I assume that's the Italian word for street. I to limbo, she to a suicide's hell. Who had kept her? Or what had kept her? The boy Fausto could only gather from listening in to her evening prayers that it was an Englishman, a mysterious being named Stencil, which is my evidence that Sidney Stencil is Fausto's father. Tenuous, to say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Stencil, we do know, saved Carla from committing suicide.
Yes.
And this is kind of the only mention of Stencil that we get in here, so it's very, once again, kind of amusing that Paola has given Stencil this apologia that, you know, we're kind of made to think is going to be the answer to everything. Like, he's been avoiding Paola. Paola's given him this manuscript, and then Stencil is like a tiny kind of afterthought in like this really lengthy apologia about this man's life, which is super interesting and great to read, but like the mystery of Sidney Stencil is not explained by this apologia.
Every chapter we get invited over by Thomas Pynchon to have dinner, and the butler comes out with the big silver serving tray, and we're expecting this fantastic feast, and every time it's just the littlest crumbs on the plate. And one of these days we're going to be eating good on this podcast.
Are we going to get the capital V veal from the Fopples?
I need a reveal
mansion.
Or I'm gonna flip flop.
Oh, yeah. We'll see if we get it. Yeah, following this this discussion of motherhood and this womb of rock that Fausto develops in on the island of Malta, we return to several recurrent images all at once. There's elephants who are getting drunk, this time not from the biblical story, but from an old folk tale about a king who wants a palace made of elephant tusks. And this is how a boy who's been charged with getting those elephant tusks gets the tusks, is by getting all of the elephants drunk and then killing them.
Which calls back to, like, we've had descriptions previously of, like, ivory objects, piles of ivory, inanimate.
Then we also get a return to decadence and a dance toward death, where Fausto wonders, decadence, what is it? Only a clear movement toward death, or preferably non-humanity.
Right after the, as part of the elephant passage, Faustus is describing this folktale of this boy who has to obtain these elephant tusks. And he says the boy had inherited physical strength from his father, a military hero, but it was for the mother to teach the son cunning, make friends with them, feed them wine, kill them, steal their ivory. The boy is successful, of course. And this reminded me of the lion and the fox discussion from back in our chapter in Florence.
7.
Chapter 7. Yes. Of this sort of duality between, do you use force or do you use cunning to sort of exert your power over someone else, or to build empire?
It really seems like we keep coming at kind of discrete points from two different angles that converge at a singular point. Following this, this is just like a really dense couple of pages, but we get a section that I think is extremely interesting, where Fausto starts thinking about who is actually talking about this. This is Fausto quoting himself, I believe, once again. And he writes that mothers are closer than anyone to accident. They're most painfully conscious of the fertilized egg, as Mary knew the moment of conception, but the zygote has no soul, is matter. And then continues, their babies always seem to come by happenstance, a random conjunction of events. Mothers close ranks, perpetuate a fictional mystery about motherhood. It's the only way of compensating for an inability to live with the truth being that they do not understand what is going on inside them, that it is a mechanical and alien growth which at some point acquires a soul. They are possessed. And then connects this to the trajectory of bombs, and again, this kind of harsh mechanical universe that does not operate by any human reckonings of cause and effect.
Yeah, and I think this connects back to sort of a running philosophy through here. He says on the previous page that life's single lesson is that there is more accident to it than a man can ever admit to in a lifetime and stay sane. And so I think there's this like running theme of like happenstance, random conjunction of events, accident. Like these events of import are not caused by necessarily always intention, but more of like a series of events, or like these like existing cycles that we aren't always like aware of, that are operating kind of behind the scenes like a machine.
Part of this reminds me of, in the philosophy of Epicurus, there's this idea of the Klinamen, Klinamen. I never exactly know how to pronounce this, but it is like a Epicurus thought that atoms in the world were just kind of in a constant free fall. And that was how the world existed, is in this state of falling. But occasionally things swerved, which is what is referred to by this Kleineman, this swerve of atoms for no particular reason or no intuitive reason or no rational reason, but things just change suddenly. And then that is where the movement of the world and all of this change comes from. And this relationship to the accident and in the mechanical order of the universe feels of a piece with that to me.
I can't wait to see what Pynchon thinks of quantum computing.
In Shadow Ticket, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of continuing. We're still in this kind of like dense passage. Meanwhile, like I think like I'm just trying to like follow the plot as we're jumping through this as well. Like I think as he's thinking all of these thoughts, this is when the air raids are going on, and so Malta is kind of being bombed. Anyways, what I'm trying to get to is this passage about the sun. We've talked a lot about the sun in different chapters here. And this was kind of like the grossest description of a sunset I had ever read. It was so unappealing. And I thought it was really interesting because we've had some like different perspectives on the sun, but oftentimes the sun is being viewed sort of like negatively. And I thought this was a really good example of this. Early sun still low on the sea. Long blinding track, white road in from the sun to point of view, sound of Messerschmitts, invisible, sound which goes louder, Spitfires scramble aloft, high angle of climb, small black and such bright sun, course towards sun, dirty marks appear on the sky, orange, brown, yellow, color of excrement, black, sun turns the edges gold, and the edges trail like jellyfish towards the horizon. Marks spread, new ones bloom in the centers of old. Air up there is often so still. Other times a wind up high must streak them into nothing in seconds. And so I guess it's like kind of I took it as like a description of the sunset, but also there's these planes that are bombing the city. Maybe it's just the planes. I was kind of extrapolating it into.
Well, it's the planes and also the like the anti-aircraft flak and stuff that is shooting up into the sky. Like, you know, in movies and stuff, you've seen like the big guns on the ground and then they're exploding explosive rounds up into the sky. And then there's tracers so that the guns on the ground can know where they're firing at. So you have these streaks of light across the sky as well.
Oh, I guess it's a sunrise. It says early sun.
Yeah. But yeah, you get the sunrise and you've got the German Messerschmitts, which are the Axis bombers, and the Spitfires are the British fighter planes. And yeah, the anti-aircraft gun and the flak and the tracers all sort of happening at the same time to cloud this, what should be a very beautiful sunrise, I would assume otherwise, if it wasn't for the mechanical and human carnage that is occurring in the sky.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of shadow imagery going on throughout this section of the chapter. Again, calling back to the De Chirico painting.
Mm-hmm.
There's even this line that I feel like almost exactly describes the painting, to be honest. It says, but the desert or a row of false shop fronts, a slag pile, a forge where the fires are banked, these and the street and the dreamer, only an inconsequential shadow himself in the landscape, partaking of the soullessness of these other masses and shadows. This is the 20th century nightmare. And I feel like that almost like exactly describes the painting, where we've got only the shadows of the people represented on the street.
Yeah, and the desert, which we remember from chapter 3 that Gabriel is fretting over. And yeah, you're totally right, Duri. These handful of chapters really just like they recirculate so many of the images that we've already encountered, whether that's like Wittgenstein or the desert or the piazzas and the squares, the rocks.
Yeah, I felt like Pynchon has been building us towards something, and I feel like we're starting to get there. Like he was like really, really hitting all the stuff. Like the balloon girl is back, the sun is back, the desert is back, the shadows are back. We've got the sinusoidal wave is back, the elephants are back. The whole sick crew is in this apologia.
And we have now finally returned to what we put off earlier, which is the River Fortune.
Ah, the River Fortune.
Which comes up right around here. There is, just before that, there's also the street and under the street, the Kingdom of Death and the Kingdom of Life, which returns. But here the River Fortune appears, and Malta and her inhabitants stood like an immovable rock in the River Fortune, now at war's flood. And this rockness of Malta, which reminded me again of Esther comparing herself to a rock when she's undergoing her rhinoplasty. I think she like feels inanimate like a rock.
Like a sculpture almost being carved?
Something. I'm trying to exactly. She like thinks of herself as like a blob that is no longer Esther, but at one point, she thinks about like the Eastern philosophies that talk about non-being and like being like a rock, I think, at one point.
Gotcha.
But Fausto writes that metaphor has no value apart from its function, which is a extremely Wittgensteinian notion that the meaning of an utterance lies in the use of the utterance rather than in any. This is where he distances himself from his earlier work. It is not in any sort of logical value of the statement, but just in what you're using the statement to do in a particular context. And this is what the role of the poet is in the 20th century. Fausto writes, to lie. That Fausto's kind are alone, so that while others may look on the laws of physics as legislation and God as a human form with beard measured in light years and nebulae for sandals, Fausto's kind are alone with the task of living in a universe of things which simply are, and cloaking that innate mindlessness with comfortable and pious metaphor, so that the quote-unquote practical half of humanity may continue in the great lie, confident that their machines, dwellings, streets, and weather share the same human motives, personal traits, and fits of contrariness as they.
Yeah, that's kind of like a sad imagery that, the truth of the world is really this, like, things are happening by happenstance. There are these cycles happening.
The truth of the world is that the world is everything that is the case.
Yeah, and, like, no one cares, and there isn't some, like, great explaining order, and, like, horrors just happen, and it keeps happening, and we're continuing in these cycles of violence.
Sort of goes back to that one passage in the last chapter with just all of the tragedy sort of listed point by point, that this stuff just continues to occur.
Yeah, but like most of humanity is sort of deluding themselves into thinking that, there's this explaining order.
They're deluding themselves because the poets are doing it. Like, this is the poet's function, at least as far as Fausto thinks at this point in time, that they are the ones who are doing the necessary work of making metaphors out of all of this stuff in the world. And the more, now that I'm thinking about it, Pynchon keeps rendering this Wittgenstein phrase as the world is all that the case is, as opposed to the world is everything that is the case, which is how it's normally translated. And that makes me think that, like, Pynchon is maybe trying to emphasize the encasement of this, that there is like a constraining encasement of the world is all that the case is. You're encased like a box.
Like a room.
Like a room.
Oh. Like
and
a
also
room.
a case in a detective sense. Like Stencil, the case that Stencil is on is all that the world is.
Maybe that's what...
Yeah, and then... Go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was going to say, maybe that's what Wittgenstein meant. The world is all that the caper is.
Yeah, exactly.
He gives this example from Danubietna of a poem that he wrote on this sort of subject. If I told the truth, you would not believe me. If I said no fellow soul drops death from the air, no conscious plot drove us underground, you would laugh, as if I had twitched the wax mouth of my tragic mask into a smile to you, to me the truth behind, the quaternary, locus of the transcendental. And then there's a mathematical equation as the last line of the poem.
Yeah, Andrew, what's this math equation?
That is a transcendental equation. But I was looking it up and I
found it.
You found it?
I found it. It's the length, I think, of the normal vector at a point on a curve.
The length
of a normal...
Like
break that down for our listeners.
Yeah, go ahead and break that one down, Duri.
So,
all right, let me look this up as well.
There were a couple of things in this poem. He said, so he talks about his tragic mask, which is like the frowning mask, which is like a downward facing curve.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And he talks about it being twitched into a smile, which is like an upward facing curve.
At the bottom ends of the frown. So you have a frown that curves upwards right at the bottom.
Into a smile.
Yeah.
So like the curve inverts. And he said, a smile to you, to me the truth behind the catenary. I looked up what a catenary is. It's like, you know when there's like two poles and like a chain hanging between them?
Oh, yeah. Bridges have catenaries.
Yeah, that's the catenary is like the curve made of the like chain hanging between the poles.
Or you have something, this is also like concatenation, when you concatenate things. This is, I think, that same...
So we've got these like curves.
I don't know if the listener can tell that we just keep knocking our microphones while we wave our hands.
We're making curves with our hands.
In curves.
Locus of the transcendental. And then as far as I could determine from my Googling, this was the formula for the length. I think this had length of normal and subnormal at a point on a curve, which I believe the like normal vector is like the perpendicular vector to a point on a curve.
Yeah, then yes, that's what a normal vector is.
Yeah. So if you're picturing, I guess, like, I think how I pictured it, and please, listeners, feel free to correct me if my understanding of this is wrong. If we're thinking of our sinusoidal wave, like our frown and our smile, the normal vector is like actually the view. Like, if you were, I mean, it depends on what point you choose on the curve. But in my head, I was choosing the point at the top of the curve. And I was picturing the normal vector as this, like, actually the vector that allows you to see, like, forward and backward over the crests of these curves. I'll have to draw a diagram for you to put in the show notes.
I'll put that in the show notes.
Maybe I was running a little too much with this, but...
I mean, I think it sounds right. We must remember that Pynchon was like a engineering physicist.
Well, and he talks about vectors. I think somewhere in this chapter or last chapter, he like explicitly talks about like vectors pointing.
The only time this equation shows up online is one math question that is being answered by all of those like Chegg style websites. And the question is, find the length of the normal and subnormal at a point on the curve. So I think this just is a curve, and then it's asking you to find the normal and the subnormal, not that is the answer. But
so this is the formula describing the curve. This
is the curve, and
gotcha.
It's asking you, the math student, to find the normal and the subnormal. What does this look like?
So maybe this is the curve that describes. This is the mathematical equation describing his smile.
Yeah,
I'm going to Wolfram Live. We're on
23-year-old Thomas Pynchon pulled out his Cornell math homework and was like, I'm going to grab something from here.
You could plot this.
The truth behind the catenary, the locus of the transcendental, and then this is the transcendental. What is a transcendental equation?
Transcendental equation is an equation that like can't be described algebraically with like monomials, I think.
Okay.
E to the x, I think sine waves are transcendental, things like that.
Okay, right.
If you I plotted it. In its, I guess, a catenary shape. I don't know. Thomas Pynchon didn't have Wolfram Alpha when he wrote this. This is doing nothing for me. Looking at this plot.
It's a curve. We've got a curve. We've got several different descriptions of a curve. Some mathematical, some poetic.
I'm going to try to post the image in our group chat.
Yeah, it's a curve that broadly follows a catenary. Okay, yeah, I see that. There's like it's a little dip.
Sort of like kind of like a saddle point. It's not quite a saddle point.
Anyways.
Hello, Patrick from the future here. Just wanted to drop a note to say that Duri later did find out that this is just the basic catenary equation and not quite as complicated as we're all making it out to be here. But she insisted that I drop in an explanation saying that we did eventually get the math right for those out there who expect us to do so. All right, back to the episode.
Plot this on your own time, everybody.
That's the essence of the 20th century. We solved it. We figured it out. Thomas Pynchon says so.
What's next?
Danubietna and Fausto go drinking. Stop me if you've heard that one before.
Yeah. They meet some nice ladies, and then they get in a fight with some anti-aircraft.
This is where the consecration
gunmen.
of the wine happens,
Mm.
and the agreement with God. They keep quoting to each other, "Go to caitiff," which I guess is they say it's from Shakespeare. I didn't actually look up where it is in Shakespeare. Maybe it doesn't actually appear in that exact thing. In any case, they speak to each other in sort of like Elizabethan English. We get another example or another rendering of these, like air combat. Not so far overhead, an ME-109 pinned by searchlight suddenly broke out of the cloud cover and swooped in. Orange tracers followed. And I really like this image of one of the guys who runs over to the anti-aircraft guns is like still drinking his wine as he hops, or he's the ammo reloader, and he's like sipping his wine as he loads ammo into the gun.
Yeah, there's a who's the third friend? Marat.
Who I guess is a reference to like the French Revolutionary. It's spelled differently, but I assume it's Jean-Paul Marat. Who is a political guy in the French Revolution.
He becomes an anti-aircraft gunman one night while drunk. He gets taught how to do it.
What is a step function? Keeping on our mathematical history, Danubietna wrote is a step function.
A step function. So, like, if you think of just like y equals x is just like a line, just a diagonal line, or like y equals x squared is a parabolic line, like it's continuous. A step function would be like y equals 1
x plus 2.
No, it'd be like y equals 1, but it only equals it for like between 0 and 1, and then between 1 and 2 it could be like y equals 2, so you get like literally like steps,
like a stair step.
Yeah, you get like
okay. So that's history according to Danubietna now.
Yeah,
no longer a curve.
Yeah, I was saying that basically things are happening discreetly.
This is where we get the kids doing all of these
airplane.
The kids of Malta served a poetic function. The RAF game was only one metaphor they devised to veil the world that was, for whose benefit. And then this is the idea of poetry in a vacuum, the kids sort of metaphorizing the world around them. We get another description of a very fancy English toilet that reminded me of the English toilet that we encountered in Florence.
That's such a good callback, Thomas Pynchon.
It's such a good callback.
Oh my God, I didn't even think about that. You start talking about
this English, there's like this English building, and it's part of the wall is blown off, and there's just this gleaming toilet that's exposed. And I was like, Thomas Pynchon would call back to the pristine, sparkling English toilet.
It's a good,
of all things.
It's a good like anti-colonial passage because Fausto talks about sort of how, I guess, like, even though he's gone to this English school and all this stuff, like he's still not allowed into the interior of these sort of English only hangouts. And now that the war has occurred, sort of their most private room is just on full display for everyone in the city who's walking by.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to reveal that I read ahead, but we get another toilet later on.
Wow. Way to reveal that you read ahead. Both of you read ahead.
Sorry.
We got a tight schedule. I've only partially read
schedule.
ahead. I've only partially read ahead. Let it be known.
I'm just planning to marathon the next 2 chapters the second we stop recording this episode.
That's fine. A Pynchon day for Andrew.
Anyways, just keep the toilet in mind.
I'm always keeping English toilets in mind from this point on. There's a long section where
they go on a very nice walk. Well, it starts out as a very nice walk. It does not end as a very nice walk. But the first,
this is Fausto and Elena.
We start to get happy sun imagery. The sun is suddenly shining. It's pleasant.
Elena is also the sun, based on her last name.
Yeah, they sort of talk about how at this point the war is the war's not winding down, but the English are no longer just taking it on the chin perpetually in the Mediterranean and are sort of starting to push back into Italy, which is causing fewer bomb raids and more time for her and for Elena and Fausto to sort of be parents to Paula, and how that kind of causes attention. Like, they'd been so focused on survival for so long that now that it's not just 100% hiding and trying to avoid being killed, they're starting to fight more. But then they have this beautiful day.
Yeah, they go on this lovely stroll around Malta, around
this all-day stroll.
Some of Pynchon's best writing, I think, in this particular section.
They go out to dinner or lunch, a meal.
They're absolutely plagued by these feral children running around. These kids are just pouring out of rubble and running around and disappearing and causing mayhem.
Flowers are blooming. And then we start to get some like foreboding imagery.
The sun goes down.
It starts to get
There's
very
like a
windy.
cloud, lots of wind. We keep getting these children imagery, which is like giving like this like growing feeling of unease that like something going to happen to these children. Like I was like, oh God, what's going to happen to these children as the chill and the shadow is coming over this town.
The quiverings about us, mounting, panicked, grew louder than the children or ghosts of children.
I think like Pynchon did a great job here of like turning this beautiful walk into this scene where you're just feeling this enormous sense of unease that like something is about to happen and it's not going to be good.
And it gets very physical. Like he describes her broken fingernails that broke because she was burying all of these bodies start like digging into Fausto's arm.
We get that imagery of fingernails digging earlier with Profane, who that's kind of how he pictures sex, as like fingernails digging into flesh.
They start looking at each other's eyes, but the eyes, like, you know, like faces sometimes start to look monstrous in the dark. We get a kind of monstrosity of human form here.
They're in a park. They've walked to a park. We also get once again imagery from this painting, the Chirico painting. He describes Paula, dear God, not even our child, but Valletta's, out alone, vibrating like a shadow in some street where the light is too clear, the horizon too sharp to be anything but a street created out of sickness for the past, for the Malta that was but can never be again.
That is just a Chirico painting.
Yeah, like there's the shadow of the child like painted onto this street where the sunlight is like really harsh.
But also doesn't make sense. Like the shadows don't align well
with the lighting and with the perspective. So the street actually like can't exist. I don't know like how you guys interpreted this, but I felt like they were kind of like walking through this like nostalgic vision of what Malta once was. And then suddenly this like chill started to descend and it became sort of like clear. Like I was expecting all of these children to be like bombed was what I thought we were building towards, but that didn't really happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think
at least
the first half of the day definitely feels like it could be a description of, you know, when they were courting before Paola was born, you know, before the war had started. And then, yeah, you get this really slow creep back to reality is, you know, you're seeing more of the kids sort of coming in and out of the rubble. And I guess we're coming up on the sort of day of 13 bombing raids that... Even though it feels like the war is ending, like it has not yet.
Yeah, and we're like, snap back to reality. We actually can't go back to that old Malta. It will never exist again.
And she starts praying. Pynchon writes, in retreat, having reached a threshold, slipped back to what was most sure. Raids, the death of a parent, the daily handling of corpses had not been able to do it. It took a park, a siege of children, trees astir, night coming in. She tells Fausto, I love you, pain, nostalgia, want mixed in her eyes, so it seemed, but how could I know? And then a little further down, how could I infer, the only ghost of an excuse being to reason by analogy that the nerves chafed and stabbed by my fingernails were the same as my own, that her pain was mine, and by extension that of the jittering leaves all around us?
Yeah, and she says, the children, we had lost them. I think this calls back to that idea of like optimism faced by then you like that gets taken down by the hostility of the world and then you retreat into abstraction. And in this case, she sort of retreats into her religion.
abstraction and metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And then manuscript Fausto glosses it a bit for us. I will limit the inevitable annotating to this request. Observe the predominance of human attributes applied to the inanimate.
Yeah, and before that, he like describes it like they saw all this stuff happening, like these goals were gathering, like the wind was blowing in. It started to feel like, oh God, like is there going to be like a bunch of droppings of bombs? But then he says there had been nothing. Whether children, maddened leaves, or dream meteorology were or were not real, there are no epiphanies on Malta this season, no moments of truth. Which kind of reminded me of the Visu revelation we got, that like Visu was nothing, or Visu was like annihilation.
Yeah, Visu is at the South Pole or whatever, with the monkey buried under the ice.
Yeah.
Total desolation.
So, like, yeah, nothing really happens here. Like, it just seems like this sort of darker mood kind of descends, but it has all the feeling of like, oh, the city was suddenly like bombed and something horrible happened. But it was really just like the realization. It
has metaphor. It's all of this sort of like trembling metaphorical energy. But what in fact happens is that, you know, the sun goes down, two people get kind of cold and grab each other.
And then
Fortune's Wheel?
Fortune's Wheel.
We
find our way back to the Fortune's Wheel.
The children are recording angels. And they have this weird idea, thanks to the teachings of the bad priest. Preached to, they might be about some abstract struggle between good and evil, but even the dogfights were too high above them to be real. This is your vectors. Instead of, if the struggle between good and evil, quote, could be described graphically, it would not be as two equal-sized vectors head-to-head, their heads making an X of unknown quantity, rather as a point, dimensionless, good, surrounded by any number of radial arrows, vectors of evil pointing inward, good, i.e. at bay, the virgin assailed, the winged mother protective, the woman passive, Malta in siege. A wheel, this diagram, Fortune's Wheel. But instead of oriented vertically, where you might be on one side of the point of Fortune's Wheel, you're at the top, things are going well, but at some point it'll tip over and you'll be at the bottom. This one is, the children's wheel was dead level, its own rim only that of the sea's horizon. So sensuous, so visual a race are we Maltese. And so they have this idea that, like, good and evil, fortune isn't like a sinusoidal function, but is instead just a single point with a bunch of vectors going towards it.
Which, when you draw it, I drew a little diagram, like, looks like a wheel with spokes.
But you're looking at it from the top instead of it orienting vertically. I mean, obviously, like...
I thought it says it was oriented vertical.
They say the old cyclic idea of history had taught only the rim, to which princesses and serfs alike were lashed. That wheel was oriented vertical. One rose and fell.
Which sounds kind of like a yo-yo.
Yeah, but this one, if you like lay that wheel down flat, I think what is being described.
It's like
here.
One of those things. The children's wheel is like in a park where you like spin it. You know, it's like not the merry-go-round, but the one that you like hold on to with bars and you get dizzy.
Yes, absolutely. You're just going like around and around this point of good.
Yeah, I was reminded of Fina briefly when they talked about like good at bay, the virgin assailed.
Yeah, I mean, this book sure has a relationship to women, don't it?
Yeah, I mean, especially because Malta has been portrayed also as this mother figure. Like, we have these series of women who have been, like, assailed by multiple men. There's Fina, there's Sarah, there's Malta now, which, if we're taking the country to be a woman, have been sort of, like, violated and assailed by men, airplanes, bombers. Which, if you draw that like picture of the wheel and you have the point at the center and you have all these vectors pointing inwards, it looks very like intimidating. Like there's all these sort of like vectors of evil that are pointing inwards at this like single point that's sort of like trapped.
Yeah.
Sure.
So the bad priest in this worldview, Fausto writes, has no opposite number. The bad priest is just like a ubiquitous evil. What was there about this priest to put him outside a radius along with leather-winged Lucifer, Hitler, Mussolini? Only part, I think, of what makes us suspect the wolf in the dog, the traitor in the ally. Reports of the priest were confused.
And he talks about the children are like serving a role as recorders.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're recording, they don't write anything down, but they're like watching everything. So these kids are like constantly sort of like peering around things or looking out over things. They're sort of like patrolling on behalf of the bad priest, which kind of reminded me of like Profane, or even like Victoria Wren, sort of like constantly serving in this like voyeur role and like watching events play out.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everything that Fausto knows about the bad priest either comes from Elena, who has had one-on-one interactions, or from what he's picking up from Paola and the other kids who like occasionally get preached to as they're running around. Like it's all sort of secondhand, it's piecemeal, garbled.
Yeah, and I think maybe we got this wrong, or perhaps I just misspoke earlier, but Elena says that the bad priest is the one who tried to convince her not to have Paola.
Yeah, I think
yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I think you just flipped it possibly in the earlier description. But yes, that's I think probably why she's the bad priest.
Yeah. I flipped or flopped or one of the others if I misspoke earlier. Yeah, and the bad priest is one who tells all of these children to like avoid sensual extremes such as intercourse, pain of childbirth. The boys she's telling to be like rocks and sort of like passive and stoic, beautiful and soulless. Whereas the girls should all become nuns and devote themselves to being God's wife.
And then something happens to the bad priest.
First, something happens to Elena. I guess it's one big thing. Happens to both of them.
Two things happen in the life of Fausto.
There's another raid.
The Day of 13.
And Elena is killed.
Mm-hmm.
For all that we've been talking about to this point, the fact that Elena's killed in a 3-line paragraph and then it's over. Like there's no reflection from Fausto in his letter at all. We just sort of find out she's killed, and then he jump cuts to the bad priest.
Yeah. So, does anyone want to set up what happens here?
Yeah. So I guess Fausto finds out that Elena was killed while in an ambulance, ostensibly like caring for the injured, and he finds out about this while he's at his like air base and just walks away from what he's doing. And then he finds himself sort of in a street, like standing at the top of a slope of debris, and hears a bunch of shouting, and then sees all of these children swarming among the ruins. And they sort of close in on this structure, the cellar of a house. And he kind of begins to spy on them and like watch what's going on. And he sees that in this ruin, the children are clustered around the bad priest who has been wedged under a fallen beam. And they determine that the bad priest is not dead, but rather than like move the beam to like save the priest,
as the priest is asking.
Yeah, as the priest is asking them to do, they instead sort of begin to dismantle the priest. Like,
well, first they begin to disrobe the priest.
Disrobe the priest. They discover that the priest is a woman.
You know, they pull off the big hat and realize that it's a woman wearing a wig. And then they pull the wig off, and there's a tattoo of a crucified Jesus on her head. And then all hell breaks loose, basically.
Yeah, and so then like there are two kids unlacing her shoes.
They pull out an ivory comb of some sort.
An
from the
ivory
wig.
comb.
An ivory comb? Who had a comb of ivory?
Victoria. Victoria Wren.
We need to just finish this because the bomb is being dropped on us right now. We need to just finish talking about
We'll just
finish this
like
description
move
of all
through.
the body parts that are removed, and then we can.
They take off the shoes that into which there's like a slot for someone to wear another pair of shoes.
Yeah, she's like
woman's high-heeled slippers.
Wearing high heels inside a boot. I'm sort of confused by this. Sounds like a cool fashion item, I'm not going to lie, but it sounds like a high heels inside a boot.
But then the other foot is completely artificial.
And they say she comes apart.
And they keep going. She's got gold cufflinks in the shape of a claw.
She's got
trousers.
Her sapphire in her belly button, a la The Dream.
Her belly button, which has a sapphire in it. Her nude body is surprisingly young.
They basically try to like chisel the sapphire out of her belly.
With a bayonet, they like dig it out.
And it starts bleeding.
Which again, like, I mean, really harkens back to these images of like colonialism, extraction, like sort of violently taking from a woman or a nation.
Yeah, she's got false teeth that I know a certain dentist would probably be really interested in as a collector of historical teeth items.
And here comes the big one. The kids peel back one eyelid to reveal a glass eye with the iris in the shape of a clock. Where have we seen that before?
Did we miss, because I don't think we talked about it, is Victoria Wren Vera Merovenge? And
we speculated. We speculated, but
okay,
because we felt like maybe she wasn't, but now I'm thinking she was.
Because she seems older, like the ages roughly match up, that she seems like somewhat older in Mondagin's story.
Is Victoria Wren a time traveler? A question
I thought it was just
that occurred to me.
Her just moving linearly through time, but changing her name.
And her body.
Yeah, it does say she's young here. That could just mean that she's not... How would she be, like 60 right now? If it's the 40s and she would have been born in like the 1880s. So not young.
Well, no, because when we first meet her, she's like 18 and 18.
Yeah, so she'd have been
89.
Yeah, so she'd have been born in like around 1880. And it's now 1990. Or sorry, 1940.
Wait, when was Fashoda? Fashoda was
1899. Or 1898.
1898.
Yeah,
but when does the Fopple situation happen? That's like way earlier.
Fopples is the 1920s. The stuff with the German generals 1903, but the main Fopple stuff is 1922. So you would have been 40 then, 60 now.
And now she would be about 60.
Okay, so maybe she was Vera.
It could just, The only thing that doesn't is her saying she was a young body, but
skin healthy looking.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps they just mean younger than they thought she was.
She does a good skincare routine.
Does have a magic amulet in her belly button.
A big robe all the time, getting no sun. It's probably good for skin.
It's true.
During all of this, meanwhile, Fausto lay prone under a hostile sky, looking down for moments more at what the children had left.
It does seem very in line with Victoria Wren that Victoria Wren would take to preaching to a bunch of children that they should become nuns.
Yeah.
Yeah. And her just sort of general wandering persona, because she never go back to England. So she just sort of keeps going to English places. I mean, she's in South Africa, which would have been an English, the Union of South Africa was aligned with the English at the time. Malta is an English colony here.
I think in one previous episode we had said that, like, you had said, Andrew, that Victoria was kind of like Forrest Gump, like for the fall of the British Empire.
Evil Forrest Gump now. I didn't know she.
Yeah, and I feel like she has this comb that's like the
she's got the crucifixion comb.
Yeah, the crucifixion of the British soldiers. So she's sort of like bringing with her like this crucifixion of the British Empire.
Well, and also what happens to the English Empire shortly after World War II is that many of those colonies are divided up and divested from the empire, not always in the most elegant ways, let's say, in such a way that it might resemble, if you're thinking about the identification of the empire like with a physical form, like you are removing all of these prostheses and artificial limbs. Again, not to say that there's like an inherent monstrosity to real prosthetics in the real world, but it seems to be the kind of thing that Pynchon is building towards here.
It's sort of the opposite. Duri, you just made the comment that her being taken apart is sort of a similar allusion to what we've seen with some of the other women being taken advantage of, I guess. But it's sort of almost flipped here, I think, because if Victoria is a symbol of colonialism, like these are Maltese children sort of taking back from the empire in this case.
That's interesting.
Not the
like
empire.
She's acquired.
Yeah, it's not the empire exploiting a local. It's the locals taking back from the empire.
Yeah, like the body of Victoria is the British Empire.
Y'all haven't seen this film, but
Try me.
Did you see Weapons?
Who directed it?
It just came out recently. The guy from The Whitest Kids You Know. It's like a recent horror movie.
Oh, no, I haven't seen it.
Zach Kreger. To all my Weapons heads in the audience, sure kind of seems a little bit Weapons coded. I'll leave it there. What I wanted to say earlier is that this laying prone under the sky and looking down is another like little Kilroy situation, like Benny earlier in The Crow's Nest.
So then after Fausto has just watched as a voyeur, not intervened in any way as these children sort of violently disassemble the bad priest, he goes down to the cellar to kneel by her, asked if she's alive, and then says he'll pray for her. And then he gives her the last rites.
With her own blood, because he doesn't have any holy water.
At which time she is making cries so unlike human or even animal sound that they might have been only wind blowing past any dead reed.
Ugh.
Haunting.
Kind of reminds me of the Strand Wolf.
Yes, it does.
Oh.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible that, like, Victoria way back when learned a few things from Mechanical Man Bongo Shaftesbury.
That was Mildred.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Victoria was on the train, presumably.
Yeah, that's true.
I did think, speaking...
Did she sleep with Bongo Shaftesbury?
She sleeps with Goodfellow.
Goodfellow,
yeah,
okay.
But I think Bongo Shaftesbury implies at one point that he wants to sleep with her.
Yeah, I think
if I'm remembering right.
That's what the
That's the pedophile.
It's the cafe incident. Yeah, is him. Yeah, the pedophile's watching this like weird love triangle.
It's a love triangle.
A love V.
Yeah, there's that, and then I did also think back to Mildred's fossil with all of the discussion of rocks and impassivity.
I did as well, and like. Even
Mildred
with this, like,
will return to being relevant any moment now.
Is Mildred gonna come back? No, I mean, I feel like this whole idea of like extraction, like breaking up the rock, breaking up the body, like digging out the sapphire. I do feel like it kind of calls back to the fossil. Yeah.
And so this is importantly for Fausto, kind of the first official, or sort of, as he says, he's sort of like a jury rigger, like he makes do in situations, and this is kind of his jury-rigged approach to acting as a priest, which he thinks may very well have broken his covenant with God in order to act as a godly man in spite of his sins, but this is Fausto 3 that emerges from this and sort of like becomes as close to non-humanity as he's ever gotten. Simply doesn't care anymore, but makes it through the rest of the war. Has no further need for God.
And he reflects on, like, why did he not stop the children or intervene or lift the beam, which kind of called me back to Profane, knowing what was going to happen to Fina, not intervening, watching or stepping away as, like, Angel beat her. I felt like we had the sort of dilemma of the voyeur coming back again.
Totally. J. Cary Grant, in A Companion to V, mentions that we should probably presume that Paula is also one of these children.
Yeah.
Because she's sort of hanging around all of the other children.
Yeah.
Seems reasonable.
And then we cut back to Stencil.
Poor Stencil. He's been at this for decades. And this woman at this party just like hands him I've been holding on to this for a little while, and I think it may interest you.
It's not been a little while. This letter is dated 27 August 1956. She just got it. She hands it over
I guess that's true.
immediately.
She does hand it over immediately. You're right. Nonetheless, he's like, all this time. I feel like I can picture the expression on his face that says, where Pynchon writes, stencil at the last thin scribbled sheet flutter to bare linoleum.
God, 8 months.
Yeah, she had been waiting 8 months, even if this was dated. She, I guess, had just gotten this, but Paula presumably had been keeping... Yeah, how does this line up? He'd been hanging out with Paula for 8 months.
He's been hanging out with Paula because he just knows she's from Malta. He didn't know.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh, there's a Maltese woman. I know something. Like, this is just very stencil of being like the most tangential way that they could be connected. And once again, he's on the money, but not because he's good at his job.
Paula gets this and immediately decides to give it to him, even though she has not mentioned anything about Malta to him in the time they've known each other prior.
Well, she read it, and there was a character named Stencil in it. And she was like, "Oh, maybe,
yeah.
Maybe I should share this with
tell
this
the
guy.
other weird guy I know named Stencil that there's a weird guy named Stencil in this."
What a pal!
And so Stencil decides that maybe he has to go to Valletta, but he's scared of it.
I would be reading about this. I'd be like, it doesn't seem like a whole lot of good happens to weird English stencils in Valletta.
And that brings us to the end of the chapter.
Yeah, that concludes chapter 11.
Yeah, I feel like things really, really came home to roost in chapter 11.
What a banger of 2 chapters.
Oh my
Great
God.
chapters.
Yeah, just fantastic.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I feel like these are really the highest of highs in this book are on display in these 2 chapters of like the extremely funny, downtrodden tragic slapstick of the whole sick crew combined with the hyper dramatized global melodrama of the stencil chapters.
I feel like we also get some like really caring moments or like insights into like love and relationships stretching across these 2 chapters.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I've heard just sort of in the air about Pynchon, and I'm eager to see if this is true, that this is his book that is maybe the most like sympathetic to its characters, or that is like closest to its characters, or most sentimental is probably the wrong word, but that's like an impression I've gotten from people talking about Pynchon's work in general, that is something defining about this book. And I think you're right that is on display in these chapters. There's like a real genuine human drama here.
Yeah, and like I think we'll see this a little bit more in our next episode, but sort of navigation of like love and relationships and like finding meaning with another person in the face of like all of the horrors that the world throws at you.
Mm-hmm.
Motherhood, fatherhood, like love,
priesthood,
Charades.
Yeah.
Friendship.
Yeah. Any concluding thoughts on this episode before we sign off here?
I was going to say, I feel re-energized. I did not feel energized at the end of the last couple of chapters, which is why I mentioned before we started recording that it was nice that we sort of took a week off, basically, and I didn't have to read V. And now I'm excited to read the next couple of chapters again.
Yeah, I'm excited to swing down the other side of the sine wave.
Yeah.
Plunge
I feel like
down
we hit
it.
a really low point in chapter 9. Not that it was like a bad chapter. It just was a really, really, really heavy chapter. Anyways, yeah, I really enjoyed these 2 chapters.
And I am glad to finally get an explanation for the front cover of my copy of V. It has been perplexing me all this time, for years since I picked up this book. What was going on the front?
I don't
Me
think
and
there's
Duri
any
were not
explanation for
perplexed
this
by our
dull
covers of
cover.
V.
There's nothing interesting going on here.
I'm on Duri's side. I like the just V with a period. It's simple, but we could have so much more.
so much more. There are so many diagrams that could be here, so many paintings that are referenced in the book.
Did you see, this is as good a time as any, real quick, we'll end on this. There's a cover there's a UK paperback cover that I think is really funny. UK paperback cover, the Pynchon. It's sort of like this weird little domestic scene of like a whole sick crew party.
It does look like a whole sick crew party.
I think is really good.
It's even got a dog.
Such a good cover. Oh my god.
It's got a dog. It's got presumably
beer,
pig and
yeah, I mean that's just this looks like a 3-person wrestling match, but you got, I guess this is Benny in the foreground, kind of.
Benny in the foreground. I think Stencil is at the corner in the background with like the sort of red jacket with the yellow lapels because he looks like a kind of older guy.
Sure.
I assume that's Esther in the ballet leotard.
Esther or Rachel?
Yeah.
Well, whoever it is like making out with someone, it looks like.
Yeah. Anyways, this is a good cover.
That's a great
I
cover.
approve of this cover.
Much better than the other cover.
Yeah, there's a series of good covers in this, but this may be my one of my faves. All right. Well, with that, thank you for listening to Pynchon Pals. Thank you to Andrew Tillett.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Duri. Thank you, listeners.
And thank you to Duri Long.
Thank you all
for joining me and all of us. You're right. Thank you to the listeners, too. I guess I already said that at the top of my thanks.
Thank you to the whole sick crew.
Thank you to the whole sick crew once again, as always. If you like what we're doing here, we'd love it if you left us a review on Apple Podcasts or on your podcatcher of choice. Some of y'all have left some nice sort of review comments on Spotify. We see you too. They're just sort of on an episode by episode basis, so they're a little harder to take a look at, but thanks for doing it anyway. That is the best way you can support us. Also, word of mouth, super helpful. Spread the word that Thomas Pynchon, more relevant than ever, as every think piece seems to be saying. There was like an Irish Times article, I think, that came out a few days ago. This is dating when we recorded this podcast. There was a review for Shadow Ticket. Maybe Thomas Pynchon isn't all that great. The article is behind a paywall, so I haven't read it yet, but I disagree. Thomas Pynchon is that great. Tell your friends. Our next episode will have us reading the next 2 chapters, which are chapter 12 and 13, I believe. Is that right? Yes, chapter 12 and 13. So read that for next time if you would like to read along. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, or as Andrew said at the top, send us a question for that we'll answer in an episode or in a wrap-up Q&A, you can reach us at pynchonpals@gmail.com. Tell us what your favorite V cover is. Maybe we'll read the results. Our theme music is Horology by the inimitable King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, released under a Creative Commons Attribution No Derivatives license on the album Polygon Dwanaland. Pynchon Pals is produced and edited by me, Patrick Fiorilli. You can find more of my work alongside my newsletter, Critical Theory Craft, at my website, www.patf.io. Until next time, see you later, alligators.
I've got an idea for a Pynchon recipe.
Okay.
Appetizer section. Whole sick crudité.
I love it.
That's really good. That's really good.